All right, Jay. So, man, you're the first helicopter pilot I've had on, which is really cool.
Good.
And, man, you've got quite a background. So 9 combat deployments, Distinguished Flying Cross recipient, probably more air medals than I can count. And, man, what a great representative of the rescue community. So really stoked you're out here and get a chance to kind of dig into your background and what makes you tick and some of your war stories as well.
Yeah. Thanks. Happy to be here. Did some time in the CSAR community for sure. It was great experience. Happy to talk about them, and I was lucky to be a part of that tribe. Yeah.
So where'd you grow up?
So I was born in Northeast Ohio, a little town called Warren, and it's in kind of the Rust Belt area. So Steel Town's kind of dried up, Youngstown, Mahoning Valley in that area. So we were there until I was about 10 in 1984. And then my father he worked for a subsidiary of GM, and they started a project out in northern Arizona on the Navajo reservation. So at 10 years old, we moved. My sister was 11, I was 10, and my family moved out to Flagstaff, Arizona. And he would drive out to the reservation, and that's where he worked. So it was a bit of a culture shock going from Northeast Ohio to Flagstaff. I'm not sure if you've been there. I imagine when you were stationed at DM, you made it up there from time to time. So yeah, it was a big life event. The first, right at that 10-year end of my first decade there, heading out to Ohio. But fond memories of growing up in Ohio, good schools. I had my grandma and grandpas and cousins and all that. So a lot of good memories, just doing normal, Americana upbringing.
Any sports?
Yeah, I got into soccer and baseball, and that was about really all I did up until we went to Arizona. And then I kept moving on with a little more baseball and soccer. And then in high school, I finally went on to some other sports, but pretty much baseball, soccer, when I was younger. So
good kid or getting in trouble? Like what? I'm trying to picture Jay.
Yeah, a little bit of both.
Time frame.
Good kid. I failed to mention this. I'm a son of a nun, so to speak. So my mom was a Catholic nun, and then she obviously got out after I think she was about 24 years old, and got married, and here I am. So I grew up with a lot of discipline, but yeah, I had some moments here and there throughout my life up until recently, even being a little bit anti-authority or getting in trouble from time to time, but nothing too serious. No criminal record, so to speak.
Nice. You always want to fly?
I did, yeah. Since I was a little kid, as I can remember, one of my earliest memories was the Cleveland Air Show in '81. So I was like, whatever that makes me, 5, 6, 7 years old. Math in public, 7 years old. And we get out of the car, and there's a Harrier just, up at like 100 feet or something over the runway. And it's really, really loud. And I just remember that, oh my God, that's cool. And then the Thunderbirds performed. So I think air shows were probably responsible for, what I decided I wanted to do with my life.
It's crazy how many people say the same thing. Like they went to an air show as a kid and decided at that moment they want to be a pilot. So that has to be the best recruiting vehicle for the Air Force.
I agree. I know the Thunderbird guys and the blend, as tactical guys, as we grow up in whatever branch, we like to give the demo guys a hard time, but it's a pretty important function, I think, for the nation to showcase, sort of the fun, excitement, adrenaline fueled sort of things you could do. And then inspire guys like you and I and whoever else to, serve.
So how'd you do in high school?
Very average. I did sports, did athletics, and other stuff. I had a lot of good friends, and academically, I think I had like a 3.2 or a 3.1. I wasn't like straight A guy or anything like that. And then that kind of was. By the time I got to high school, I had done Boy Scouts and sports, and had a pretty good upbringing, pretty good schools. I started to believe like, well, I'm not going to be, a 4.0 and the captain of the football team and the valedictorian, and I'll never get into the Air Force Academy. So I'd sort of lost sight of, the early childhood wanting to be a pilot kind of thing. So I kind of came out of high school not really knowing what I was going to do, which I think is pretty typical nowadays, even today, like, kids coming out of high school today. So Some of us know we're going to go to this college and study this thing, and that's what you know. And I wasn't one of those guys, which I think you were probably in that category yourself, from what I've heard and seen.
Yeah. So you finish high school. Were you thinking about going to college at the time?
I was. I wasn't real motivated. Well, I was motivated to come back to Ohio, actually. So that's one thing I didn't touch on. During my high school years, I started working at a big YMCA camp back on Lake Erie near Northeast Ohio, where I grew up. So I would spend my summers there and then go back to Tucson for high school, and kind of had like these two different places I'd spend my time. So I thought about going back to Ohio initially to go to college, applied and looked at some scholarships at like Kent State and a couple other small schools in the area, and that just didn't really pan out. So I think it was April of '93, and I did like last minute enrolled at Arizona State just to kind of at least go somewhere and get out of town, since the scholarships and that kind of stuff hadn't worked to go back east for college. So I just went up to Tempe and became a Sun Devil for a year.
What'd your parents want you to do?
They didn't really give me a lot of guidance other than try to stay in college, get a degree. I don't think they were wanting me to take time off and go off the college track. Which I ended up doing anyway after a couple of years of screwing around. But yeah, they never really pressured me one way or the other. I think my dad's an engineer and my mom is an educator. She retired after 40 years of teaching. My dad was a very successful aerospace engineer. So I think they probably had, they wanted me to do something in service, maybe not so much business or anything like that. So either be an educator and a coach, or get into engineering and science and do something like in the STEM field. I would say that's probably what they would at the time, if you asked them, that's what they would have wanted. But I just wanted to figure things out on my own. I wasn't going to be told, what to do or that kind of thing.
Did you pick a major when you went?
Yeah, I laugh because if you talk to some of my best friends from growing up, they'll say, yes, to answer your question, I picked many majors and changed majors, changed schools, transferred after that first year up at Arizona State, transferred back to Pima Community College in Tucson, which you're familiar with, obviously, with your time there. So I'd say I was a little bit lost. I was just taking regular classes at knocking out, your first 2 years kind of stuff that would transfer at the junior college, saving a lot of money. And started working a lot, worked as a valet and a bellman at a local resort in Tucson. So that's when I really started to learn how things really work in the real world. So, yeah. And then I took a year off of college after that because I was just kind of screwing around and didn't really have a lot of focus academically or professionally. I was making great money, taking some junior college courses, hanging out in Tucson with my buddies, and it was a fun time, but I think I needed some direction. So,
how were your grades?
Just again, average. I think I was just above a 3.0, somewhere in there. I looked at my transcripts.
So doing enough.
Yeah, just getting by, but not really, not knowing where I was going, what I wanted to do. So, took a year off, and I actually went back to from Arizona. I went back to Camp Fitch, this big YMCA camp. It's a 8 or 10 weeks of summer camp, and then the rest of the year it's an outdoor education center. So school districts will send up like all their fifth graders, or one school, if it was big enough, would send up all their fifth or sixth graders for like an outdoor, go to camp throughout the school year. So fall, winter, spring, there's always someone up there, and they needed folks to stay over the year. So traditionally people from camp would take a year off from time to time, do a gap year and work at camp and teach and live, kind of in an outdoor environment. And, so I decided to do that, and it worked pretty well for the fall. I did that for about half of a year, and then decided to join the Army National Guard. Because at this point, my parents were like, well, okay, you're taking a year off, dude, you can figure this out on your own. And if you want to go to college back there, you can figure that out on your own too. They were kind of done, financing my lost ways at the time. So that's sort of how I ended up getting into the military, which the Army always appealed to me too. We talked about wanting to fly. I'd also been very much wanting to be a soldier. I was a GI Joe kid.
You watch Rambo and all that
yeah,
stuff?
Rambo, First Blood, and GI Joe, and I wasn't a Star Wars kid so much, or a Skeletor, or He-Man, and all that stuff. I was in all the GI Joe toys and helicopters and planes and soldiering and all that kind of stuff. So.
Seems like a lot of pilots. Sorry to interrupt
No,
there,
go ahead, dude.
but a
That's
lot of
your
pilots
show.
that end up in Helos and A10s and 130s, kind of that world,
Yeah.
or guys that grew up GI Joe, Rambo, that still
Yeah.
they wanted to fly, but they still had that connection to the guy on the ground.
Yeah, that's a good observation, and I'd say that's true. That streak kind of runs strong within the A10 tribe and the CSAR tribe within the Air Force. So so there I was 21. I had a couple years of college credits, took some time off, and the Army Guard was like, "Hey, we'll pay for 100% of your tuition." And I wanted to go to Ohio University back there. That's where a bunch of my friends from camp had gone, and it's just this great institution. Also a good party school. So I wanted to go there, and it was like, okay, so I'm going to sign up, do 6 months of active duty, basic and tech school, and then they're going to pay for 100% of my in-state tuition in Ohio. And I was like, well, sign me up.
So Army Guard in Ohio.
Yeah. So off I went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, to learn basic training and then learn my job, which was an artillery MOS in the Army. It's not even around anymore. It's basically been replaced by GPS in the artillery realm. So did that. It was great, man. Doing all the Army stuff. It was like a tough football practice and Boy Scouts and shooting all wrapped up into, that's basic training. That's what it was for me. A lot of marching around and getting yelled at and all the standard PT and all that shit. But it was fun. And then, after that, you come off of active duty and then go back to, in my case, Ohio, and then did the weekend warrior thing while I was in college. And then I was on this chapter, I think 106, GI Bill, which was just like an extra, it was like beer money. I think it was like another, as long as I was enrolled in some amount of credits at an accredited school, it was like another $100 and some a month. It worked out. It ended up paying for the rest of my college and getting my degree, and enabled me to go to OU and play
So
Army.
it worked out like you planned.
Yeah, it worked out really well. Was able to play Army, and then I did a lot of stuff actually with Army ROTC before I ended up going with Air Force ROTC. Kind of an end game decision there to make the switch, but I was very much looking at, okay, I'm going to get my degree, and they had programs called simultaneous membership program in the Army ROTC, where you could be in the Guard as an enlisted guy and then do ROTC and then commission into the Army. So I started off going down that route, and then decided for other reasons to head over to the Air Force and commission into the Air Force because there was a chance to get a pilot slot. And so. Best decision I ever made, I think, was to get to do the Guard and try to do college and the weekend warrior thing at the same time.
What was the artillery school like? Like, what did that entail?
Field artillery is there's really a couple of big platforms they have. So 105 millimeter self-propelled, and then 155, which is basically a tank with a massive howitzer, cannon on it, shooting out 155. So there's a lot of different MOSs. There's the gun bunnies, so the guys that are literally packing the stuff into the back and all the powder, and then launching the projectiles out of the cannons, or the guys driving them around, that kind of stuff. I was in what was called survey at the time, so it was similar to like a forward observer. We were sort of out in front, and we would survey positions where they would roll in the guns and set up an azimuth of fire. So this is stuff you probably, as an A10 guy, it resonates with you a little bit. So you have to know exactly where you're at when you're lobbing artillery. So we would go set up the gun sights and the azimuth of fire and yada yada yada, using like tripods and traditional survey equipment. So we
Pretty math intensive too.
Math intensive, procedure intensive, but you're also out there kind of on your own in a Humvee, scouting around, doing stuff, and you're kind of working ish with the forward observers and those guys, and then they'll bring the guns in, get them set, and then start employing ordnance. So the term was called control. So control, just think of it as like a 10 or 12 digit MGRS, like super, super tight, knowing where you are on the earth. So that's the way when you see traditional dudes out on, doing surveys on a road, you've got this tripod set up over a place where this is a known point, the survey control point, and then you extend control, meaning, exactly this property line's here, this road's going to go here. So clearly, this was as GPS was really coming online in the mid to late 90s. And we spent 8 weeks learning traditional survey, and then, which was cool. And then a week learning how to drive around in a Humvee and do that job with a big INS GPS system and extend control without having to do all the traditional stuff. So you learn like the classic analog, version of it, and then you learn the modern version. And that's really, once I got to the Guard, I never broke out a theodolite and did any actual old school survey. It was all just training with the new technology, pads, I think it was called, like position and azimuth detection system, and we just bebop around on our Humvee and figure out where we were and tell the guns where they were and then where they can shoot. Because when I'd say, like, in the artillery world, when you have a mishap and a round lands somewhere where it's not supposed to, the survey guys are the first dudes. They're gonna go, okay, do we even know where the guns were before we started lobbing artillery? So it's cool talking about this to an A-10 guy, because, like I said, you can kind of understand this. You had to do it from an aerial platform, but the precision involved in putting out big ordnance like that was a pretty interesting process.
Are they still teaching them the fundamentals, like the old school ways, or is it all
no? I think
GPS now?
It's GPS. I know that MOS went away. It was 82 Charlie. I don't know what it turned into or got rolled up into a common MOS, if like the 13 Foxtrots or the 13 Echoes, which were the kind of forward observer math guys. I'm guessing that all got rolled up into some MOS that the Army has within field artillery now. I've never really went back to look, but I would submit that's probably the case.
Yeah, I just bring that up because I think those foundational skills are so important.
Oh, dude.
And then as we get all this new technology, we start, it like takes up all the bandwidth and bumps off some of those foundational skills of like reading a map and finding your location, getting ordnance on target with just your eyeballs, not necessarily using the beeps and squeaks.
Eyeball and exactly. It's funny in the Army, soldiering is shoot, move, communicate, learn how to spend a lot of time at the range and basic training, learning how to shoot, learning how to run around and do stuff in the woods and communicate. So it was, and then land nav, knowing where you are, right? Map, compass, and not having GPS and looking around and land navigation, those core skills. I think I had a pretty good basis for that going into the Army. Just the way I was raised to pay attention to where I'm at and knowing, I don't know if it was the Boy Scouts or whatever, but I got to the Army and I did well at land nav. That transferred for the rest of my career. Knowing where you are on a map and knowing which way the wind's blowing and this and that, knowing your environment, kind of that MET-T equation, right? Really, there was a lot of times in learning the 60 or learning the Huey still in UPT before you didn't even have wings, knowing where you are and how to read a map. And that transferred really well as I moved through tactically employing, helicopters and teams on the ground, and then being able to talk Army a little bit gave me a little bit more credibility. As you were prior enlisted before you went into UPT and fly the Hog, you kind of can appreciate you learn how things happen at the enlisted level, and it makes you better as you become a decision maker and knowing what's important and knowing what the basic core skills need to be.
Yeah, I always thought the crew chiefs appreciated when they saw a former crew chief in the cockpit.
Yeah.
Give you a little tip of the hat because you know where they're coming from.
Right. There's like this little bit of a language there that you can communicate with each other and you're speaking the same language. It kind of cuts through a lot of the BS with the officer enlisted model, if you want to call it that. Not that I don't think that that's a BS model, but you know what I mean when you don't have guys that understand what's going on. They're really dependent on the communication with senior NCOs and that kind of stuff.
So you're in college, enlisted Army dude in the Guard. So why did you go Air Force? Like, what pulled you over there?
The short answer is just the chance to fly. I was looking at doing in the Army, so you want to be in the infantry and go to Ranger school and be a leader. That's kind of the path that most cadets, not most, but some cadets want to do that. And then there was the helicopter thing, where that was really more of a warrant officer thing in the Army, which I think, most of the audience here is probably going to understand that whole system and how it works. So the Air Force guys, I had actually heard that just scuttlebutt around the armory with these ding dong guys in my Army National Guard unit, like, oh yeah, just shop talk stuff. Like, oh, you're not allowed to be in the Air Force if you've been in the Army or the Marines. They don't take you. I'm like, oh, okay. Never really thought much of it, and start hanging out with some of the Air Force ROTC guys, and they're like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And you need to talk to our colonel. And so I did, and it was like, no, we'll take you. And ended up getting to this program where it was similar to simultaneous membership, but I did ROTC. I was not contracted, if that makes sense. I was kind of auditing ROTC, but I played all the games and did honor guard and all the stuff you do. Did the training, but I stayed in the Army Guard as an enlisted guy, so I could keep those benefits, because the Air Force at that time, they didn't have a lot of financial aid to throw at me, and they're not going to beat what I'm getting from the Guard. So I was able to be, weekend warrior, Guard soldier, and then also do ROTC. And then when I came time to graduate and get commissioned, the Ohio Army Guard, I did 4.5 years on a 6-year enlistment. They're like, dude, we're not going to stop anyone. If you want to go, you got a pilot slot in the Air Force and get commissioned, like, good on you. The sky's the limit. They literally wrote that on my Army Achievement Medal or whatever it was when I left as an E4. So that was cool that they just kind of let me move on and continue. I didn't have to serve out that enlistment before I can get commissioned. So, and I actually looked at some OTS options while I was in the Guard. So there was, I'm going to college on, most of my days, and I can do ROTC to get commissioned that way. But they actually had OTS classes as well in the Army Guard. So I looked at doing that. But the kind of the best of both worlds for me was like, Air Force ROTC, Army Guard. And then it all just aligned where I was able to make the timing work and then go on active duty to June of 2000, get commissioned and graduate college, all that stuff on the same day. So
how hard was it to get a pilot slot when you went through?
Funny, good question. So that pendulum has swung back and forth, as we've seen throughout our life, and the wants and needs, requirements of the Air Force versus how many people want to do that. That's always been back and forth. I slid in because, we talked earlier in my childhood, I wanted to, go be a pilot. Well, okay, I didn't go to the Air Force Academy. I guess that's just not going to be an option. But by that time in the late 90s, there had been guys mid-90s that were like banked. Remember, you ever talked to guys that were banked?
Yeah.
And so there was,
just for the audience, there was a time where they're graduating so many pilot candidates that they didn't have the availability to start pilot training. So they might go do another job for what, like a year and
or
a
two?
half?
Yeah. And then that kind of turned into casual status. But point being there is like, they need pilots, they don't. They need pilots, they don't. And that we've seen that. That's just historically the way it goes. They're reacting to other market, factors with the airlines and that kind of stuff. So, and then generational things, right? You got the baby boomers. And so I was able to get in at a time where they really needed pilots. You'd have to do all the testing and physicals. So if you could check all those boxes, it wasn't quite as competitive as maybe it had been in the early to mid 90s, but this is 99, 2000. And it was like, hey, we really need pilots. So if you can get qualified, and I, hit all the gates and got my slot. I initially actually got approved for navigator. My physical had, this is like 3 months before I'm graduating, and it's like, I'm a navigator. Well, that's cool. I'll go do that. But why? Oh, well, there's something wrong on your physical. Okay. And it was something with my heartbeat. EKG was a little off. Well, I was 25 years old and in really good shape because I'd been doing all this ROTC and National Guard. And it was a normal anomaly for a 25-year-old fit human or male or female. I don't even know if it matters. And that just needed to get a waiver. And then I was approved for a pilot slot. So I I was waiting and waiting and waiting. And like, hey, where's this waiver? It's typical bureaucracy. So the Marine Corps had an OTS thing where you get your degree and you go right off to like their officer basic school and get your commission. And then you have a guaranteed flight contract. So I was kind of like, well, I want to fly. I want to be a pilot. I've got ROTC, but I'm uncontracted. I'm a free agent. So I went over and talked to the Marines and went in and talked. And they basically laid it all out. Like, dude, sign, and you graduate in a couple months and you're off to go fly if you get through OBS. So I was like, cool. So I played that card with my ROTC colonel, and the next day, oh, look, your waiver is good. You're going to be a pilot. So
you made some calls.
Yeah, it was just, stuck on a desk at Wright-Patterson somewhere in some medical clearance office. And you have to kind of do that, as you probably learned as you navigated your entire time with the DoD. There's no big magic fairy in the sky in San Antonio and the HR department that's has a plan for you. You have to kind of engage and push yourself to make things happen sometimes. So it all worked out, and then I got commissioned as a second lieutenant in June and got my degrry, and then.
What'd you get your degree in?
I ended up with a sport, exercise physiology, so a BS in sports sciences. So I'm that typically led to, I took a hard right off of that path professionally. I mean, the degree was a means to an end to get the commission. Most guys and girls that I graduated with that in that school went to either med school or osteopathic medicine or like professional training or corporate fitness. That's kind of where the ex-phys kids went. And then guys like me, girls like me went to the military through ROTC or whatever.
So when you started pilot training, did you already know what you wanted to fly, or was it kind of just wide open?
It was, I was pretty focused on Vipers, and the reason why was because I went, I mentioned it, banking turned into casual status, right? So did they have casual by the time that you...
They had casual, yeah. And again, what that is, hey, you're going to pilot training, but we don't have a spot for you. So we're going to put you somewhere so you can get some experience, maybe do some work, and wait for your start date. So is that what they did with you?
Exactly. And so casual was exactly that. You basically go to an Air Force base and you're like a well-paid intern waiting to go to your actual training. And that could have been any CONUS base. I heard, again, just at, where did I go? Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana when I did my little 6 weeks of ROTC, officer boot camp, which nothing against ROTC, but after I was almost an NCO in the Army, and that was a joke. They literally forced you to sleep 8 hours every night. So while I was there, I talked to this guy. Oh yeah, you can go casual to the PACAF or use SAFE if you want to. You just have to ask. I was like, oh, that's cool. So I asked my colonel at ROTC. I'm like, hey, what's this overseas casual deal? Oh yeah, you just got to pick. You pick PACAF or use SAFE, and we'll honor that. And then you fill out a dream sheet for the bases you want to go to, and you'll go to one of the 3 bases that you choose. But you will not start UPT for like a minimum of a year. Like some guys are casual for 2 or 3 months, and then they've got a class date. And it was like, we're going to PCS you to, somewhere in Italy or the Pacific, and you're going to have a class date that's probably a year, 18 months out. And it was like, okay, cool, sign me up. So I put on my sheet was, I think, Aviano, Germany, and then Turkey maybe as my third choice. And I was lucky enough to get Aviano.
Nice.
So, yeah, dude, I say this a lot. My Air Force career, it peaked early. Like it was never as good as that first year, 2000, 2001. I was
like no real job in Italy.
Yeah, dude. So there's 2 Viper squadrons there, the 510th and the Triple Nickel, both pretty famous, and they had just gotten done with the Allied force, and they between those two, that wing, the 31st at Aviano, I think they dropped the vast majority of the tonnage in the whole Serbian, Bosnian, Allied force campaign. So these guys are coming right. The morale was really high. Good bunch of dudes and dudettes, and there I am. I'm right out of college in Aviano, Italy, and scheduling office. They put me and another dude in scheduling, and we just would build the schedule on a whiteboard every week and learn the inner workings of a squadron. And you get to meet everybody because you're selling the schedule to the the chief of scheduling, and then the DO and the commander and the weapons officer. Everyone's coming in to buy the schedule every week. This is when it was all done,
on a whiteboard with pucks, right?
Yep, whiteboard with pucks. Which I miss that. I still do, I still use a whiteboard and pucks for my personal calendar. For I have this thing, it's literally called the big ass calendar, and it reminds me of scheduling days, right? Not so much pucks, but dry erase.
It's nice to have a big visual representation.
Yeah, big picture. Yeah. So anyway, did that. Got to jump in the back of a D model.
So F-16D, 2-seater tandem cockpit.
Yeah, and that was awesome. It was a really fun year. I actually was supposed to be there for 18 months before I had my class date was 18 months, and it got moved up. And I was going to someone in Mississippi.
Keesler.
No, Columbus.
Oh, Columbus.
Yeah,
that's
Columbus.
Right.
And so I had orders to Columbus. My bro, that was the other casual in that squadron with me at the time, had orders to Del Rio. And we had gotten bumped up from 18 months out to a year out-ish. And then Del Rio wasn't going to work for him. He had just gotten married, and his wife wanted to continue to go to school and work on a degree. Well, Columbus would have been much better for that. And I was like, dude, I don't care where I go, Texas, Mississippi, whatever. So our OG got involved and basically swapped our UPT locations. And then off I went to Del Rio in, I guess that would have been summer of 01. So a year in Italy, and dude, it was great. Yeah, those D model rides were humbling. I never had been airsick in my life, and I thought the Air Force had paid for me to fly a 172. I don't know if they had that program. My university happened to have their own little aviation program. So, I'm like, hey, I got my private pilot's license. I ride motorcycles, whatever. I'll be fine in an F-16. I'm not going to puke. Well, dude, when you're a casual lieutenant, it's not an incentive ride. You're just self-loading baggage. And so my first sortie up was on goggles at night in the weather, hitting the tanker, doing ACM. It was a mess, dude.
And explain ACM.
Yeah, so that's air combat maneuvering, I want to say. So you're basically up there dogfighting with I think it has to be 2v4 or 4v2 or some version of that. And I didn't know what any of that meant. And
so no consideration for your comfort.
No, none whatsoever, and at all. And some of the young captains were like, "Oh God, you're gonna puke your fucking brains out, dude." There's no. I'm like, "Oh no!" And so I ended up betting a case of Corona on it, in the snack bar, because we were snackos as well, me and the other dude. It was humbling. So went up. Puked my brains out, I had to take off a glove and fill up a glove because the puke bag was done. And I got through the sortie. They were able to go do their ACM, hit the tanker, and come back and shoot it through in and out of the weather. I mean, it was, and they were just laughing their asses off at me when we got back. It was yeah.
Did you have to clean up the cockpit?
Oh yeah, clean up the cockpit. I learned so many lessons by just hanging out with a really cool fighter squadron, good bunch of dudes that year. Got to go TDY to Wessup. Which you familiar with that?
Mm-hmm.
Where they fire a live one off the rail, hit a drone. So we went. They had self-deployed the F-16s with tankers, which is a big thing. Do you ever do you probably did an overseas? Yeah, that's a logistical train to drive. So we were actually ready to go step to the D models in our poopy suits, doing a transatlantic flight. They were taking the 2 D models and then I don't know, having their jets. And someone from the harm shop says, "Oh, casuals can't do that," or whatever. So we end up having to scramble. They look at the regs, and for some reason we could do local training sorties, but not these across the North Atlantic. Pretty high risk in the middle of the winter. And we ended up flying commercial to JFK, and then doing the TDY at Wessup. And then also learned not to F with F-15 guys, because we zapped. So zapping, you want to explain that, or do you want me to explain that? So squadrons have stickers, and when you go to other squadrons or fly in their jets or wherever, you just try to take your own squadron sticker and leave it in a strategic place that may or may not be noticed at some point. So that's my version of zapping. Is that basically?
Yeah, valid.
Yeah, valid. So we're at Tyndall. And I go get a ride in the back of a F-15C model. So that was totally different than the Viper, really cool. And of course, I zapped the inside of the cockpit with a buzzard sticker. And they all think, no harm, no foul, but let's fuck with the new casual lieutenants without wings, right? So we get told that they're really pissed off and their DO's mad. And we got to go out to the jet and peel the sticker off ourselves. And my other buddy, Burn, we were Crash and Burn was our casual call signs. So we go out on the flight line, and the cops, everyone was in on it, the security forces guys, and we just get jacked up, dude. Like literally face in the pavement, butt of a gun to the back of the head, and they totally book us, so to speak. And then everyone's taking pictures and laughing their asses off, like we got the full treatment. And both squadrons were out there like, that's pretty fucking funny, but don't fuck with our lieutenants anymore. My unit was their squadron was pretty cool about it, but. Yeah, learned a lot about Air Force culture. That whole casual overseas program, as I understand it, dude, they stopped doing it. Like someone wrote their PhD thesis somewhere on how big of a waste of tax money it was, and then the Air Force stopped doing it. So I think that was a few years after, I maybe 03, 04, that went away, probably when the GWAT kicked off and money started getting scrutinized. But, I don't think it was a waste of tax money. I learned a lot about leadership and Air Force culture. And then by the time I got to UPT, dude, I was like, I'd had 15 hours in the back of a Viper and then that one F-15 ride. I would go to this sim once a week and learn how to do fixes in the pencil. And, I had to just sit in the sim and learn not how to fly a Viper, obviously, but how to do the stuff that I was going to see when I got to, in this case, Del Rio. So it really prepped me to go into UPT, having been in an operational unit. So lucky to have had that opportunity.
Yeah. So UPT, undergraduate pilot training down in Del Rio. How'd that go for you?
Del Rio by the sea. It was great. It was hard. It was challenging. A very intense 6 months. I was just there for 6 months. Most Air Force guys, you go to a base, you're there for a year. But in my case, I went Helo, so I went to Fort Rutger. But that 6 months at Del Rio was great. I'm still in touch with some of the bros from the class. A lot of academy guys in my class. It was a little later in the year. And a lot of them were athletes, so they weren't super uptight. They weren't the top of the class. They were yeah, I played football or I swam or did whatever. And then I just got my pilot slot because that's what you do when you go to the academy. At the time when there was a pilot shortage, and I snuck in under the radar from ROTC. These guys at the academy, as I understood at the time, if you wanted to not fly, say you were qualified physically and checked all the boxes, and you said, I want to go be a contracting officer, you had to talk to, I don't know, a 1-star or something.
I remember that.
Yeah.
They thought something was wrong with you.
We want you to be a pilot. That's what the Air Force is about. So it was odd to me because I grew up thinking oh my God, I'll never get in. I didn't go to the Air Force Academy. Here I am freaking going to UPT, spending a year in Italy at an F-16 squadron. So things peaked early. Then I paid for that. For the next 19 years, I paid dearly for that. I joke. I love the next 19 years, but...
How'd you do?
At UPT? I did well. I had a little bit of a leg up with what I had just talked about. So the flying piece was good. I have never been a big studier. So academically, I had to put in a lot of effort because, the quizzes and the daily stand-ups and all that kind of stuff. So that was really hard. The hands-on flying stuff and talking on the radio, probably a little ahead of the curve when I got there. So that helped. And I think I was the first one in my flight or my class to solo, or one of the firsts. And then I came back. I think I was the first dude to take the very first contact EP, maybe check ride. And I came back and it was bad, dude. I failed. I had 13 downgrades, and the rest of my class was oh shit. That was one of the stronger swimmers in the class to that point. And then I come back and just had my ass handed to me on my first check ride. And it was a lot of procedural stuff. It was just nerves and excitement. And just I think I routed my oxygen hose the wrong way under my seatbelt, just literally the kind of silly stuff.
Just a bad day.
But totally bad day. And but it was, again, humbling. You're okay. And then I actually went on, I think I failed another one later in the program. And I had an 89 ride, which for the audience is if you don't pass your 89 ride, dude, you're going home. You go out of the flight, and then you go up to the squadron commander to basically give you a little progress check. And my IP at the time, really good dude. We're still really tight. We should probably get you guys in touch. He'd be a really good guest for you. He's had a really cool career in the Air Force, and he's now with JetBlue. And we'll talk offline about that. But there's some really good stories from him. But anyway, he was in there in the squadron commander's office, and we're in there getting ready to fly, and we just got done briefing, and he just looks at me and shakes his head, says, "Don't fuck up." That was my advice for my assigned IP. He's like, "Don't fuck up." I passed the ride. Here I am. I got, went on with the program. But yeah, it was fun, hard, easy, all the above. But just a wonderful time to be hanging out in West Texas with a bunch of like-minded guys trying to figure out how to fly jets. It was really cool.
It's so stressful because at any moment you could just be going home. Like you have a bad week, bad 3 days.
Yeah.
And you see it happen.
Yeah. And I thought, I'm on top of the world. I'm soloing. I'm the first one to go to the check ride. And it was like, bam, reality check. And then the next thing you know, I'm on an 89 ride, 2 or 3 weeks later. It was like, holy shit, they're not fucking around. You have to meet the standards here. Great. Now that it's 25 years later, I can look back. I mean, the Air Force does a really good job of growing pilots. All these UPT bases, these pilot factories, they've got it down. They know how to identify folks and then do like that IFT program where I had to get my private pilot's ticket, essentially in a 172 before I even got there. So they've got a pretty good filter. And then once you get into the pipeline, your success rate, I don't know what they wash out, maybe 20 or 30% now. I really have no idea, but it wasn't like, only look to your left, look to your right, and only one of you is going to be here. It wasn't kind of like that kind of training. Like you were pretty qualified to be there, to have a seat at the table. And if you put in the effort and you're going to get through. But yeah, you can get yourself washed out in a hurry with 2 or 3 bad days in a row. So
when did you go from wanting to fly the Viper to ended up in the helicopter?
2 numbers, actually. 9/11. That happened probably halfway through tweets, and that changed everything. And that's where I was, everyone like in previous generations remember, when we put a man on the moon and when Kennedy was shot, dude, my 9/11, I was in Del Rio, Texas in the night flight room watching it all unfold on CNN. I had buddies, we were in solo phase, or maybe another flight was, but we had buddies that were out and soloing, right? Out in West Texas in the MOAs, and this call goes out. I think it was Guard. All Laughlin Air Force Base, RTB, max forward velocity, no joke, like shit got real really fast. And so there we are at Laughlin, which is at the time I'd heard there's more takeoff and landings there every day because there's 3 parallel runways and you got tweets and 38s and all these training going on. And it was dead ass quiet for a week. We didn't fly. And the airspace structure, obviously in the entire United States, just went to a screeching halt. But that happened too at our base. I'd say a week, maybe not quite a week, maybe 5 or 6 days. And then, it was like, okay, there's a war is going to start. And we had some helicopter, some Pavlo 53 guys and some 60 guys that were like either flight commanders or instructors and scattered throughout the base. At Laughlin, and I would kind of go look at the pictures on, their background and their desk, and it just really piqued my interest. So then I decided that, I'm either going to do fighters or helos. Either way, I'm happy because I'm going to be getting in the fight. And worked out. They rolled an extra. They swapped with another base, but there was 2 of us in my class that really wanted helos, and we got 2 helo slots for that class, which was awesome. And then Chris and I went on to, go be helo dudes and go to Fort Rucker. So,
was it the rescue mission that really drew you in?
Yeah, rescue, SOF, all this stuff, just being in the middle of the fight, I think, being down there, to your point earlier, that thread of wanting to be supporting the warfighter on the ground, right? I would have been perfectly happy to go T-38s. Don't get me wrong. I mean, still like, my goal was, I'm going to go 38s, go Vipers, and get assigned back to the 510th because that was so awesome. I want to just go back and do that again, but actually be, have my wings. So, it was, that would have been cool. But, looking back now in hindsight, like I'm glad I went helos. Nothing against Vipers, that mission set, but that's a lot of high altitude casts, wheels, and whatever else, doing as far as the war fighting went, I ended up where I wanted to be in the Helo world. So yeah, it's crazy to think about. It's been a long time.
Nice. All right, let's take a quick break. And then when we get back, we'll get into your time at Rutger and getting into the helicopter.
Mother Rutger. Yep, it was a good time.
Hey guys, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. First up is Papa Bear Naturals. Papa Bear makes all natural personal care products. So stuff like beef tallow balm, toothpaste, deodorant, and it's all without any of the chemical additives that you get with the mass-produced corporate stuff. And it's also sourced from local small ranches like this one. So check them out at papabearnaturals.com. Also like to thank Buffalo Wool Company. They make the best socks I've ever worn in my life. They're comfortable, they're breathable, they last, and they're all sourced with American buffalo wool and manufactured in America. So buffalowoolcompany.com, check them out. Also like to thank my Patreon supporters. $5, you can get the show early and ad-free. So without further delay, let's get back to the show. All right, man. So how was being an Air Force guy training helicopters with the Army at Fort Rucker?
It was awesome. You come out of tweets. At that time, we were still in tweets. 100 hours solo formation. I'm a little mini jet jockey, right? But you don't have your wings yet. And you get to Rucker, again, super humbling. My class, we had 8 guys. It was a pretty big class. Typical class was 5. We had 7 guys, and then a female who was in the Guard. Actually, pretty interesting story there. Jackie Parker. She was one of the first female to fly a Viper, and had gone on to be a test pilot and all this other stuff. So 9/11 happened, and she wanted to get back in the fight. She came out of the venture capital world. So she was in our class. So she was like 42 and like this cute blonde, like fighter pilot, like legendary. And then and the instructors, there's a point here. The instructors were all retired warrant officers, stopped keeping track of their time in the Huey, somewhere around 20,000 hours, because who cares at that point, right? And they were just tons and tons of time and experience training Air Force jet jockeys every 6 months that come out of these bases that think, they know what, well, you get a pretty idea what weather flying and IFR and fixed wing, but it's just a whole different game with Helo. So learning to hover is kind of your first big gate there. And everyone is somewhere between about 8 and 10 hours before you can like fully, like, the IP can take his feet and his hands off both controls, and you can actually hover unsupervised. It takes a minute to learn.
Yeah, like what are the phases of training?
Yeah, so similar to like a UPT, so it uses UPT-H, so undergraduate pilot training helicopter. So there's like a contact EP phase. So we're just out beating up the pattern. They've got these I don't know what they call them, Army airfields. Right, this is like an Air Force base and Army airfield. Then there's training areas, which is like a bunch of like 6,000 or 8,000 foot runways, all parallel, right? And you just get into these patterns and practice. Just flying a Huey around, big wop 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 wop, single engine, Vietnam era Huey, real low tech, round dials, and all that. So you learn, there's academics. You go in the morning and you get your academics taught to you, and then you go to the flight line and start flying, do contacts, EPs, auto rotations are like the first big cut. Like,
so contact is like basic takeoff and landing, emergency procedures.
Yeah, like go take the race car around the track and like learn it and learn how to deal with some situations that could arise. And then I'd say the big cut line there is auto rotations. If you can't pass auto rotations, then,
explain auto rotations.
Yeah, so that's basically when a helicopter falls out of the sky. There is upward airflow. So there's inertia in the blades, right? So we're assuming like the power gets cut off, either single engine, well, in that case, single engine, or both engines fail, right? So when a helicopter no longer has anything powering the rotor system, gravity, wins. So it starts pulling your little helicopter down towards the earth. So your rotors are going to continue. Your main rotor, right, is going to continue with inertia and then upward airflow as you fall down. There's going to be an upward airflow that kind of pushes that rotor as well. So you essentially in the helicopter, you have a cyclic and a collective, and you just dump that collective to the floor once the power cuts, right? Your rotor is going to start to decay, meaning the RPMs are going to start coming down. So you got to slam your collective.
And what does
down.
that do?
See, the collective is named that for a reason. It collectively puts, in this case, it would have been a 2-bladed, in like a 60s 4 blades. There's helicopters that 5, 6 blades, but it collectively puts pitch at the same rate in and out of the blades, however many are on your main rotor system. So you dump that to the floor and basically take all the angle of attack out of it. So it's a rotary wing, so it's a wing spinning around. So just like it's aerodynamics is all the same. It's chord angle gets higher, that disc is gonna be lifting more, and if you flatten it down and slam that collective, those blades kind of basically all flatten out, and so you're no longer producing lift. You're accepting the fact that you're a glider now, and you let it fall down, and you're coming down around 2,000 feet per second, typically ish, give or take. So you're falling towards the ground pretty quickly, and you dump all the pitch out of the blades, in this case 2. And the Huey was a very easy and forgiving helicopter to train auto rotations on because of that high inertia rotor, very, very heavy rotor. So the way that translates is you kind of get in an auto rotative state, maybe I think we were about 90 knots, right? So about cruise flight. You kind of have these things thrown on you in cruise flight. So you fly around the pattern, you get set up, and then you just dump, simulated engine failure. You dump it, start falling out of the sky. The air's falling up, pushing up through the rotor. It's spinning around, and then you get down and you kind of flare, and then level it off and let it come down and settle. And then you just cushion it with whatever collective you have left. Because as you pull in that collective, it's going to provide lift, but then you're going to piss off rotor RPM. So it's just a really tricky thing to do. There's a lot of timing involved, but you get it. The first time one gets demoed to you, you think you're all going to die. It's not. It's very, very, very unsettling. And then you're doing them, and once you're at the controls, it's like anything. It's not quite as unsettling because you get a vote, but as a passenger, dude, auto's no fun. And then in the Huey, we were on skids, so we would come down on this 1,000-ish foot little runway paved, and you'd hit on the skids and just slide. And other aircraft, if you have wheels like on the 60. But in the 60, we would never train auto rotations. Later on, when I moved on to the Pavehawk, any UH-60, you terminate at about 15 feet because it's a low inertia rotor. And it's a lot trickier with the way the throttle and the gas and all the physics work. So it just, you would beat the hell out of 60s if you did them to a touchdown every time. So Army, Navy, Air Force, everyone on a 60, you come down and you're no lower than 15 feet and 15 or 30 knots ground speed. And that's kind of an acceptable envelope to get yourself in, to then let it fall all the way to the ground and then do your cushion. Because once you cushion on a low inertia rotor, which is the 60, it's 4 blades, but they're not that as heavy as a big Huey. You go and pull in you got one chance. And a Huey, it was like, oh, let's cushion it. Oh, that wasn't enough. Let's cushion it some more. Like there was just so much weight in that rotor. So the rotor RPM didn't slow down. The lift didn't trail off as much as you pulled it. So it was pretty easy to learn on those. And then you graduate to another helicopter, and they all have their own nuances. But yeah, that was, that between hovering and then learning to auto rotate, that was the first half of that 6 months. So another 100 hours or so we spend, training. So, and then we move into the Air Force phase where we're not flying with these, retired, Vietnam vets, best hands down, the best, most experienced, Huey pilots in the world and instructors, and they teach you the basics, and then you go into the tactical phase where you're doing your formation, low level, clock to map to ground, basically land nav, but at 100 feet and 120 knots, flying around lower Alabama, just learning how to do the fundamentals, the basics, just like an infantryman with a compass and a map, you're just doing the same thing with a helicopter. And then eventually you start learning the systems, and then you move into night vision goggles. So that's kind of at the very end of Fort Rucker before we graduated. We did, I can't remember, maybe 10 or 12 hours of goggle time, formation, low level. So by the time you get to the 60 school, like you're, been exposed to that. So
in the Huey the whole time?
yeah, this is at the time it was an H model Huey. These were like 1969 models that literally had like patched up bullet holes in them from the war. They've gone to I think it's a Huey 2, and I think it's twin engine. And I think you get to like Rutger and you just go right into Air Force instructors. So you go from these crusty old Army dudes to like, not FAPEs necessarily, but like Air Force captains out of the Huey world that would come from the missile bases and the VIP bases where we fly Hueys, and then have an assignment at Rutger teaching us how to tactically employ a Huey, for lack of a better term. So it was a blast. You learn a lot. There's the book, right, and the black and white stuff, and then there's always the gray areas. And I think the good IPs throughout any of that training, I look back and I think about situations later where I was able to save an aircraft or a crew or whatever, get myself out of a bad situation, just out soloing a jet in West Texas. This is the kind of stuff where IPs are like, look, we know you're not supposed to do this. We know there's rules. Well, here's what you're going to do anyway. You're going to go out there and do some dumb shit. And if you get yourself into the situation, this is how you get out of it. Like you stall a tweet or whatever. No one comes out of the womb knowing how to fly a plane, let alone a helicopter. So there's some just basic fundamental things that instructors would just take you out, and you essentially just get into a big, nice LZ the size of a football field or two and just play and just, hey, let's take the helicopter and rotate it around the mast as we go down, and then let's do it back, and then now let's pick a point on the ground and rotate it around the nose and like move the helicopter around or around the tail. I mean, stuff that's not really in the syllabus, but you just developing hands and skills. So a lot of that, great training program at the time.
Ever scare yourself in that program?
Yeah, and that's why there's always IPs with you, right? Initially, when you're learning how to hover, it's incredibly, it's very, very fine muscle movements, right? So you're trying to hover, and like they'll just give you the cyclic, like this old geezer Vietnam vet that's taught he's done this lesson 100 times, and he already knows what you're going to mess up, and so they'll just give you the pedals, the tail rotor pedals. So now, like, he's going to keep it in a 10-foot hover, and he's going to keep it over the same point, and you're just going to like use the anti-torque to take pitch in and out of the tail rotor and just point the nose, and that's a shit show. And then you get that down, and then okay, let's try pointing the nose and using the collective, right, and keeping it at 10 feet off the ground. So now you're trying to do this, and it's just this. You can tell when a guy's learning if you're just a casual observer on the ground. And then eventually the cyclic. But I remember they would just sit there, like put their finger right on the cyclic and look over at you and hold a hover and like look at you and just be like, look, forward, backward, like just to drive home minor little touches, to make a helicopter hover, or do a slope landing where you're putting one skid on a hill and trying to hold. I mean, there's all these little tricks they teach you, and it was great. And those things saved my ass many times later in my career. So really good job of teaching the fundamentals. And then you come out of there with your wings after, it's roughly a year or so for everyone to get through UPT between, your basic fixed wing stuff and then whatever you go on to track select to. And so our bros back at Del Rio were graduating summer of 2002, and then there we were at Fort Rucker, getting our wings at Fort Rucker. And then off to, in this case for me, it was off to Kirtland Air Force Base to learn the 60.
What were the options out of Rucker?
At the time, for our class, we had Hueys, 60s, and 53s. There's typically 153 per class, maybe one or two 60s, and then the rest Hueys. And the Hueys, at the time, dude, I was like 26 and single, and I wanted to have a Huey at Andrews Air Force Base and go to DC. And like, that would be a lot cooler than, maybe going to, it was all like, all the options were good. There was Tokyo, like Minot was probably like the last pick, at some of the missile bases, Malmstrom and Minot. So that's kind of how the drop went and how the preferences went. I was kind of like cool with whatever. And our top guy got a 53, second guy got a 60, and then I got a 60, and then the rest were Hueys. And then a lot of those guys later transitioned back over into the 60s. So the Hueys, where you go, if you don't get your 60 or your 53, and which would now be a V22, this is a 53, was retired in '08. You come out and you can go to Hueys, but it doesn't mean you have to stay there if you don't want to. You can cross flow over to 60. So we got a whole lot of guys throughout my career that would come into the squadrons out of a Huey assignment. And some of them go back. You know, they come in, get some 60 stink on them, and then they go back and become a leader in the Huey community. So it's a cool cross flow thing that happens. And then another thing we get in the 60 community is prior Army guys. So there's always been sort of a stack of guys that want to come out of the Army, whether warrants or commissioned, that want to maybe cross flow to the Air Force. And that's sort of the control valve for the flesh peddler at AFPC that's trying to, you know, man all these squadrons.
That's the personnel office.
Yeah, our HR department. There's a helicopter guy, and he knows the needs of the squadron commanders. And it's like, hey, we're short on the pipeline is only producing 12 dudes this year and dudettes. So we need 17 to keep all these squadrons combat mission ready. So they just grab 5 off the top of the pile from the Army, cross flow them over to the Air Force. So it's a very joint world when you fly helicopters, because the Army flies the preponderance of them. The Navy has a lot too, and I think you've probably talked about the UPT routing through the Navy and the cross exchange kind of stuff that goes on. So it was an interesting mix of all that for me, especially having been prior Army as an enlisted guy. My first time I ever was on a helicopter at Fort Sill, I jumped in a Huey and I rode in the back, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever. So, and then to come back to Fort Rutger and then learn how to fly from the best was a hell of an opportunity. What's
your opinion of the Osprey?
My opinion of the Osprey, I have a very strong opinion, and it's pretty, I'll sum it all up, man. I think it's a fucking poster child. Am I allowed to swear?
Yeah, whatever you want to talk.
Fucking poster child for the military-industrial complex. Conceptually, well, you know, it's all, you got to look at the context, right? So I think that thing was probably, they hit the drawing board with that thing in the 70s. I mean, it's not an old idea. And, you know, conceptually a tilt rotor, great. And we're seeing now urban air mobility and drones and flying motorcycles and all this stuff that's come out of the drone world. Well, back then, that was a pretty groundbreaking thing to do a tilt rotor helicopter / small C-130. Well, military industrial complex, at the end of the day, that the Osprey employed someone in all 50 states. So imagine trying to kill that as SecDef.
So it's like the F-35 of the Helo world.
Yeah. Yep. It's like a really big, it's a Swiss Army knife, right? It can kind of do everything, and it gives generals a hard on because it's got range and it's got speed and it like looks really good on paper. But who drove the requirement for the V-22? The United States Navy / Marine Corps, because it's designed to pick guys up off of a amphib assault, take them to a beach and set them down. And then really, really good at that. Really good at that. Well, so when you make a requirement like that, like the F-35, you got Army, Navy, Air Force, all these competing branches with different requirements. So for the Navy and the Marine Corps, the thing has to fold up like a fucking transformer to get onto a deck of a ship, right? So talk about hamstringing engineers. They're running I think they're running 5,000 or 6,000 PSI through their hydraulic system, which is a lot as opposed to 3,000 in a 60. And so from an emergency standpoint and a maintenance standpoint, it's an absolute nightmare because they had to fold it up. Like if you could go ground up and just do an Osprey version that didn't have that requirement, probably would have been a lot safer. So say what you will about Donald Rumsfeld, dude came in and had an absolute hard-on to kill that program because it's just killing Marines, and it's like the soft dudes don't want it because it can't fit what we fit in a 53 or a 47. The downwash is a shit show. It's 160 miles an hour. You can't fast rope out of it. I mean, there was just all these like end user applications that it just sucked at, and it got forced like the F-35 kind of like, hey, this is the toy you're going to get figured out. So the branches and the squadrons and the tactical level operators have had to figure out how to ingest that and employ it in a safe manner. I think the Air Force has figured it out. on a steep learning curve. The Marines have figured it out. It's still very expensive to operate. And again, Rummy, like if Rumsfeld couldn't kill that program, then what does that tell you? You know, you employ people in all 50 states, everyone on the Hill is going to push back. So here we are. I don't know when that thing's going to sunset. I imagine it'll be sooner than the H-60 and sooner than the UH-1. You'll see those things in the boneyard, and that will have been an experiment and a poster child for the military-industrial complex. That's my opinion on the Osprey. Is that strong enough opinion for you?
Yeah, it's good stuff. It's interesting coming from a Helo guy.
I would never fly one myself. I wouldn't touch one of those with a 10-foot pole, like just from a safety standpoint alone. Now, are they being operated safely? Yeah, we've learned, and there's dudes and dudettes out there flying them, and they're doing the mish, and it's got some soft applications, but it has a lot of limitations. AFRICOM is probably a great place for it, right? You don't need improved runways. There's the tyranny of distance problem. I like to throw that term around in the DoD when you talk AFRICOM. So yeah, it can get out and move, and it's got legs and it's got range, and it doesn't need a runway and yada yada. But it's not what you want doing precision, soft, rotary wing, infill, exfil stuff. I mean, when I say precision, like rooftops or inside of a compound or that kind of stuff, places where you can put smaller birds. So it's a tool in the tool bag. We figured out how to use it safely. But Jesus, a lot of people died, on the learning curve. Was something that probably shouldn't have been rammed down, the service's throats. So,
all right. So 9/11 happens when you're in UPT in pilot training. Mm-hmm. When did you get to the war the first time?
04, Kandahar. I go to Kirtland, which is our B course essentially, and I had orders to Moody, and this on the little student, bulletin board, they print out an email that, hey, we're going to stand up a unit in Tucson. It's the old 55th Special Operations Squadron. It's going to be another active duty rescue squadron. If anyone wants to kind of take one for the team and change their orders and go to Tucson, then talk to the flight commander. Well, I had been in Tucson 5th grade through high school, and still had family there. It was still basically my hometown. So I read that, and the next I go find my flight commander, like, hey, I'll be one of the guys that goes to Tucson. And so they swapped my orders, and I got to be one of like the first two to four lieutenants out of the B course to go to this unit, the 55th Rescue Squadron. Great experience. Lucky to be in that unit at that time, just like I was lucky to be in the Buzzards right after they got done with Allied Force. They stacked the deck. So I'll say patchware, you know what I mean. Most of your audience knows. You kind of explained the wick and the patch.
Go ahead and explain it. Just
so
quick.
In Air Force, if you want to use the Top Gun as a reference, the Air Force's fighter instructor weapons school now is a really intense PhD in leadership, large force implementation of whatever your weapon system is, whether that's cyber, space. It started off with fighters like Top Gun to make our fighter pilots better and fly against aggressors. Now that's extrapolated out across all domains, right? So, so that unit, at the 55th. So they stand this unit up, and it's 8 patches running around. So a patch is someone who's graduated said course, and it's like kind of top of the tactical employment, PhD level instructor. Like, we take our good instructors, we make them better, and we make them better at integrating across the entire Air Force ecosystem in sort of mock, war game scenarios by the time you graduate that course. So super sharp, motivated bunch of guys, and we had 8 patches. Normal squadrons gonna have 1 or 2. So our DO commander had just been running the WIC H-60 unit, so they come down to stand up a unit. All the flight commanders, all the ADOs, the weapons and tactics shop, like all the key personnel were handpicked patch wearers. And then here come like 4 lieutenants out of Kirtland, and then more and more people come in. So it was a really cool unit that tried to be a little different and have higher standards. And we trained a little differently than at the time. It was Nellis and Moody were the big 2 active duty squadrons. And they wanted to kind of use some of the roots. I think they wanted to have that culture from the 55th SOS, which had closed down at Herbert like 4 years earlier. So we did these intense 8-week pre-deployment spin-ups where we flew with hard crews, and we did a lot to mitigate the issues that, the Air Force was having with 60. So we trained really, really hard, and you couldn't even wear this, like you wore, like anyone that got to the unit would wear just a black leather thing with their name in the wings. You didn't even get your Hawk and Moon until you got through our CMR program. So that kind of pissed off the other units, that there's like this super unit standing up and they're pulling all the talent, but eventually it all homogenized, and we started at the 55th, a standard operating procedure that all this other squadron commanders signed on to. So they were trying to take that super WIC tactical knowledge with also some 160th Army background. Our DO at the time was a superstar in the Army that came out of the 160th on an exchange, and then he just stayed in the Air Force. So we had a bunch of visionary leaders, and they kind of tried to fix and get the rest of the active duty and guard and reserve components all like aligned as an airframe, as a weapon system. So it was cool to be a plunk lieutenant, right, co-pilot in that squadron and cut my teeth there. Learned a lot. We deployed 8 months ahead of our initial operation. Like, we were supposed to go to Afghanistan, I want to say in like late 04, early 05, but we went in early 04. They were just, full up, pushing. So there I am, a first lieutenant in Kandahar in 04 on my first combat
co-pilot.
Co-pilot. I was in the flight lead bird, and because we had hard formations, hard crews. You spent 8 weeks of TDYs. Like, our spin up was intense before, and we kept that. That squadron has tried to keep that, mentality and how they prepare to deploy. But the deployments, at some point, they just you get overcome by events with PCSs and all that kind of stuff. But at the time, 8 weeks of training, TDYs, and then you get downrange, and you're flying with, like, my aircraft commander, who's also the flight lead, was on the Goldfiend pickup. So he's on the Goldfiend pickup. So I've got this like patch wearing badass dude that I'm just trying to hang on and be a co-pilot, not screw things up, and watch him run the formation and run the crew. So that was a great learning experience for my first combat deployment. And we were at Kandahar and did a variety of things, either saving coalition or U.S. or local nationals. That's something that people don't really realize with CSAR, PR forces. When you're in a theater and you're trying to win hearts and minds, right, you go out and help out the locals when things are above their capacities. So got to rescue little Afghani babies that had fallen into a well that otherwise would have died. And then, we get the call because it's not going to interfere with a vol, meaning we're not, we're always sort of on alert, ready to launch, but there's really not a lot of risk for Air Force pilots at that time. So we would go and do these sort of one-off things, and then we'd work with SOF. And so we were sort of jacks of all trades and had to be really, I learned a lot that deployment on how you need to, brevity codes and jointness and being able to interface, brief and debrief and play, so to speak, with other entities within the DoD or the interagency across the U.S. government. Like, we are the 911 call, so people want to learn how to energize us and use us.
What was the war like at that time?
Yeah, Afghanistan at the time was, I'm not going to say it was compared to when I went back there in 2012, it was a Wild West. Now, 2001, 2002, 2003, Afghanistan was really the Wild West. It was still, and I say that meaning you didn't have a lot of colonels and chiefs running around enforcing reflective belt, rules and that kind of stuff. Like, you didn't have Burger Kings, the sort of what the deployed KBR industrial complex had turned a lot of our bases to over as those GWAT, theaters and bases matured. So there wasn't a lot going on at Kandahar, and we were all in tents and that kind of thing. So fast forward, I do a bunch of Iraqs. I get back to Kandahar in 2011. So it's 7 years later. I'm a lot more experienced in more of a leadership role, and I didn't even recognize the base. There's like 20,000 forerunners running around, and like the whole other side of the base is built out. There's this massive perimeter. There's the Canadians built like brick dormitories. It's like a campus. Early on, we had a couple birds up in Kabul or Bagram, and we had a couple in Kandahar. And I'm talking Air Force CSAR. So we had a very big footprint of customers, right? And
So basically, what was your job? Like, what was your day-to-day mission?
So we're always on alert when CSAR forces are deployed. We're pretty much 24/7 the whole time. Like there's no days off or that kind of thing. We would do, I think at the time we would do like a 72-hour alert, and then you'd fly a training sortie, so to speak, and come off alert, and then hand the birds over to the next guys. Then that transitioned to 12-hour shifts. That first Afghanistan deployment was like the old model. We went all through Iraq, and then later on in Afghanistan, where you're either on a day or a night shift, and you're there for 90, 100, 120 days, whatever it is, and that's it. You get there, and the more you deploy, the more you rotate in and out, you just get the high five, like, oh, hey, dude, it's either your own flight from your squadron, or it's some guys from Moody or Nellis or Alaska Guard or Kadena, whatever, and you have a few days to do handover, and then that mission, there's always someone on alert ready to pick people up. So doctrinally, the Air Force owns us, and we're a CSAR platform, and we've got PJs and guns, and we can push blood and do all these amazing things. We're there to work for the CFAC, the Air Component Command, right? So we're there to basically pick up pilots if they get shot down or have an emergency. Well, that doesn't happen that often in the GWAT once these theaters get matured. So anyone else that is in a Helo that gets, crashes or has a precautionary landing, by the way, Predators, MH1s or
MQ1s,
MQ9s, those things go down. There's a lot of sensitive equipment on them that we don't want other, foreign state actors to get a hold of. So we would get launched on recovering critical components out of, ISR assets. So anything and everything that, starting with human life to very valuable property that the government wanted, we would be sort of on alert to go pick up and have to analyze things real time.
Did you pick up injured Army guys on this trip?
On my first deployment, we occasionally, it wasn't the norm, because again, I talked about how so you've got this table is all of Afghanistan. You've got, 2 bases with CSAR. By the time I get back there in 11, after all the Iraq stuff, dude, you can get across Afghanistan with a set of golf clubs going from FOB to COP to main base to ANA base. I mean, the theater had matured a bunch, and there's a whole lot of Army medevac there, right? So also the fighting had picked up, and then the fighting season in the spring and summer was always a thing. So I was happened to be there mostly spring and summer in Afghanistan or Iraq, and we would pick up Army soldiers, Marines. We did a lot of work out of Bastion, which was a FOB out in, actually really a main base out in Helmand Valley, where the Marines were doing a lot of work in the Helmand Valley of Afghanistan and southwestern Afghanistan. So those guys were in it. Marja and some of those big offenses they had there, we were the primary call. The Brits sometimes were there. I mean, we're just part of a big infrastructure of the golden hour of getting to people that are bleeding out, back to level 1 care, and then on a plane to Germany to get stabilized. And we were, just part of that chain. We were probably the most capable, but there was so much going on. We had to kind of spread that workload out between the branches and Army medevac. So we did a lot of stuff that would just be a typical Army medevac mission, or a really tough Army medevac mission, because we had the hoists and the guns and everything. I didn't need, I'm taking a formation in. We don't need an Apache gunship or OH-58s or A-10s to do most of the stuff we're doing now. If we're going to go fly into Iran and pick up, a dude that got punched out of a spy plane, then we're probably going to want some A-10s or some Apaches, and we're going to launch a full task force, right? So kind of talking the talk here, these terms on the way we employ CSAR. Doctrinally, that's why it exists. All the branches need to be able to go recover their own personnel. Well, the Air Force, your worst case scenario is an air crew or a single pilot that has punched out of an airplane because he's dropping bombs on another country without their permission. We got to go get him out. So back to the Jolly Green Vietnam model, right? And PJs and the hoists and the whole thing. So we took that legacy into the GWAT, into those 2 major theaters, and then now Africa, and just a bunch of great Americans trying to save other Americans or other humans. And that's really kind of what it came down to. It was a really cool tribe that way.
So explain to me what the crew looks like and what they all do.
So in a Pavehawk, which is the Air Force version of a Black Hawk, I can kind of talk to that if you want me to, but there's, hundreds of variants of a regular UH-60. Ours had a lot of extra medical capacity, mostly because of the PJs, right? And then we got the ability for the PJs to push blood, which is really amazing, where we can get to a point of injury and start pushing blood. So they're not going to have to wait till they get another 20 minutes, So, we've got chaff and flare defensive systems, that kind of stuff. So very, very capable platform, because doctrinally we're trained and equipped and organized to go pick up guys in other countries without their permission, whether that's a soft team or whatever. But when you're in theater, there's plenty of other stuff to do. So on a basic 60, you'd have the two pilots up front. So the front enders, as we call, and then the back enders, which are two, which traditionally were a gunner and a flight engineer. And that has been morphed into one AFSC called SMA, so Special Mission Aviator. So those are enlisted guys that run the guns, run the checklists, keep the dumb pilots up in the front from doing stupid things. And they actually run the hoist. They help hover the helicopter when we don't have references. So the CRM and the teamwork that go on within the tribe that I came out of, and I would say any crew aircraft that is put into some really hairy situations, is unbelievable. Like, we really are masters class CRM, the way we approach it as a tribe, and it saves lives and it makes you very effective. And that goes back to like the hard crew, right? So if I know my flight engineer and I know his inflection and I can tell when he's really worked up or he's quiet because we're training at home and he's got something going on at home, like, you just really get to know your crew. And that helps mitigate risk.
So a crew of four.
Yeah, typically. Crew of four. Typical, we'd say customers or guys in the back. Typically, we're doing CSAR. We're going to have 2 to 3 PJs. But if we're supporting soft guys, it's going to be a mix of PJs and CCTs, depending on who we're working for. PJs now they're not just married to H-60s. They can go on HC-130s, or they have now been flying on Army 47s in some theaters. Like, those guys are agnostic as to how they get to the fight. But typically 2 to 3 PJs, and either a team lead, which would probably be on the flight lead bird. So kind of once we put that PJ team on the ground, that sort of is the GFC, for lack of a better term. Like, that team lead is going to have command of whatever they're going to do on the ground to affect the recovery, and then get back in the helo, and then let's get back to good guy territory. So we could fit more at times, but half of our cabin's taken up with extra fuel bladders. So a typical 60 has a lot more cabin space. A Pavehawk, it's half of it's chewed up with extra gas, and then it's also extra weight too. So that was probably the one single factor that caused, accidents or mishaps with Pavehawks, was the fact that we were heavy and we were flying in high density altitude. So hot, high desert environments, mountain environments, helicopter rotor systems get allergic to density allergy pretty quickly. So we run out of power margins. So we would not even fill up those auxiliary tanks at times in Afghanistan when our footprint of, like, I've got to cover half the country, or I've just got to cover this one little postage stamp area around Kandahar province because I've got medevac birds that can respond quicker, right? It all came down to the response times. So we would not even fill those things up, or we would take one of them out or take them both out. So we had more cabin space because we didn't need that much fuel, but we needed that much space for casualties, right? So every deployment was the same, but everyone was different depending on the situation at the time.
So did any missions stand out from that first deployment?
Yeah, I'd say the first one, the first orientation, your first, jump in the helicopter and then fly down to the Texas range south of Kandahar and then fly back, and then an IP, you just cycling guys through just to say, hey, here's the local area of FAM, right? So you remember that. You remember your first launch, which is crazy. The butterflies were just insane. And that one actually was an Afghani baby that had fallen in a well and they had recovered, and our PJs were actually up at a fob, and this Afghani family came, and here we go. So we get launched and we go and do that. So that one was interesting. We were bent on both of our guns. We were running 50s, and we were bent left and right after we fence check coming off after we leave
not working.
We leave the friendly base, and we're kind of out in Indian country in Afghanistan, and you do a fence check, which is, hey, we're in bad guy land. Let's check everything, and both guns are bent. And it was like, oh, okay, not that we didn't plan for it, but we didn't expect that. And we had to land in a wash, and our, back enders are back there, and the gunner, our senior NCO gunner, fixed both guns, and off we go. So yeah, you remember some of the details. And there was just, every time we went out, dude, was some one-off crazy bad situation. Typically we were getting the call when it was below their ORM standards. So moon angle, illumination, weather minimums, all the stuff the Army couldn't do from a medevac PR standpoint, then we'll just jump on it because we've got the FLIR, we've got better training, we've got the hoist, we've got the guns. We don't necessarily need a gunship depending on the threat situation in the terminal area. So we did it. I logged an 8.1 hour sortie and never got out of the seat. And we never hit a tanker. We just hit FARPs. So a FARP is a NASCAR pit stop for a helicopter in the middle of the desert, either on a big airfield or on a small FOB. You just pull in with 2 helicopters to some fuel trucks, and the rotors are turning, the engines are going, and they just plug in, and you ground it and do some grounding wire stuff and go through some checklists and hot gas. And then if you need to rearm, then you'd rearm. So forward area refueling and rearming point. So we'd hit FARPs. So I think we did 5 heart bounces. That was a big soft thing where they're rolling up a big village, and that was crazy. So at 8.1 hours without getting out of the seat. We had, I'd say the big one if I had to pick one from that deployment was the Pat Tillman situation. We had launched, we were up we had gone from Kandahar up to the Coast Bowl area to a FOB up there. And we didn't know it was Pat Tillman until the next day, but that whole thing unfolded, and we were rotors turning, 2-minute launch authority, ready to launch to go pick up. It ended up being a dead U.S. Army and a dead ANA, Afghan National Army. They launched out some 47s from the FOB we were at. Like every dude with a gun got on, and a big firefight. The B1s were employing, A10s were employing. This is just over the ridge. And we're ready to watch. And the KOC's like, hey, we're watching the Predator feed. We're going to send you guys in. And then the decision was made. These guys are dead. So why are we to expose recovery forces? There's no one's coming out. It's a hot area, and there's not the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. Like, we're not going to go risk these rescue forces for people that are deceased. And so that went on until we flew home and got back as the sun was rising. Went to bed, got up as the sun is setting, and CNN comes on, and Pat Tillman's dead. And that was the mission we were on. It was like, holy shit.
So did you guys go in and do the recovery?
We didn't. No, I think that ended up being a ground recovery with the QRF.
Okay.
So that whole Tillman thing, though, that's a whole nother situation,
Sure.
A whole nother story to be told. But as I understand it, the decision was made that they just kind of let that firefight and those call for fires kind of simmer down. And then in the daytime, they probably went in with a QRF with Humvees and whatever else, or they brought in some Army Blackhawks, daytime low threat. I don't know how his actual body was recovered, but it was weird for me because I had been at ASU, and then Tillman was at ASU the next year, and I had buddies that played football and knew him, and then here I am. I'm like, Jesus Christ! I just almost had Pat Tillman in my helicopter, but we ended up not getting the call. But that was a crazy one. We had one time where we had picked up 2 Taliban dudes, and they were cousins, and I think one of them had shot the other one in the ass, and they were like, we had to put them on different helicopters because they were, just crazy as shit happens when you're downrange, right? So
yeah, I think people don't realize that we will provide assistance even to the enemy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, persons under confinement, we would go soft guys would bag and tag dudes and, they're flex cuffed and bags over their head. And we would transport pucks and do, just whatever needed to be done within reason. Like anything, you have, there's a 5,000 mile screwdriver at Al Udeid at the KAOC where you're working for that general and that whole chain of command. But then there's a lot of other requirements that are emergent that pop up in theater that you kind of have to go, okay, we want to help. We want to go do this. We want to go save people, but we got to ask, hey, can we launch on this? Because we're technically chopped to them. So there's always been a game of OpCon and take-on relationships and the ComRel of who you're working for. We learned, I learned a lot about that. I think as a community, we learned a lot growing up in the GWAT. Fast forward to Iraq, where 05 through 10, I was there every year. Did a lot of support for JSOC, and we would get take-on. The KAOC would pass take-on to JSOC for like 12 hours at a time. Like every 12 hours, they had to send an email. You have these forces, and they work for you. So it really was very interesting being such a capable, requested LDHD, so low density, high demand asset that everyone kind of wanted to check the CSAR box and have the oh shit plan briefed and ready to go. Everyone kind of wants that. And at the time in Iraq, the JSOC and that mission, the counterterrorism mission, and beating the insurgency they got what they wanted. And so we would get chopped over to the soft guys a lot. And then you learned how that whole world worked.
Did you guys ever get shot at on that first deployment?
Don't recall on that one. And I would say in general, like plenty of guys have gotten shot at in Afghanistan, but in general, Afghanistan, the terrain, the technical conditions and with flying helicopters are going to kill you more than the threat. Not that it doesn't happen. In Iraq, it's flat and it's really the power lines at night, running around most of Iraq where it's really flat. But the altitude, we had power in Iraq, meaning we weren't crashing and rolling helicopters over in brownouts because we had plenty of power to get out of bad situations. The threat there was bad. Iraq is when we really started to learn how, we trained a lot about getting shot at and dodging missiles and getting, notching and throwing chaff and flare. And then it started happening quite a bit when Iraq really got hot and heavy. And that was RPGs. It was just regular dumb rockets, coming out of the back of a technical kind of a pickup truck or whatever it is, man pads occasionally. So Iraq was really, and then small arms. So I think my first time getting shot at was in Iraq, not too far outside the wire. We were kind of doing a nightly run out west, patterned ourselves probably a little too much, and got lit up with small arms fire. We broke and returned fire, and some of my Bones Cook, actually, who they were in his formation they got lit up by a complex ambush in a field with 3 different points of fire coming at them, and they're just kind of making, I wouldn't say a milk run, but they're running down to Baghdad to go pre-position for an op, and they got lit up in the triangle of death, the Sunni triangle or whatever they called it, like in between Balad. So yeah, the Iraq kind of towards the surge, and then after that. 2010, 2011, it really slowed down as far as the threat went. But Afghanistan, I was way more worried about rolling a bird or a brownout landing or running into a mountain on a low illumination night than taking enemy fire in 99% of the time. I mean, there's areas where there's hot LZs and they're shooting at helicopters, but nothing like Iraq. That'd probably be my summary of, the threat level across the spectrum of what I saw.
All right, Jay. So after that first Afghanistan deployment, you go to Iraq multiple times, right? So like, what's your life like at this time? It's like, seems like multiple deployments in succession. Is that right?
04 was the beginning of a crazy, I'd say, decade of deployments. And then I did a 1-year remote to Korea. So Iraq, we got there in 05 with the 55th. And, busy. Iraq in general was very busy from by the time I got there in 05 until 2010, you started to see it trail off and the surge sort of work, but it got really sporty 07, 08. things got pretty sporty with a lot of helos going down just across the entire theater with the whole coalition, and then we would respond to a lot of those. So there was I did the Kandahar, then Balad, and then I came home and did somewhat of a short notice PCS out to Korea, and did a year in South Korea, which was really cool. Which you went through the Osan saga for 1 or 2 years?
I did 1 year at Osan.
Yeah, I didn't take the incentive pay to stay for a second year.
I'm good.
Yeah, got out of there without too much trouble, and then right back into it with Iraq. That third one, I went, my third overall deployment, I went and worked for JSOC, and I worked in the JOC running the Global War on Terror, which was amazing to kind of get exposed behind the curtain of, the black soft side versus the white soft side, and work, General McChrystal was running the show, and it was like, right as we had just gotten Zarqawi, which had been public enemy #1 for Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and then all the intel that came off of that objective. And it was just hot and heavy. The ops tempo was super, super high for all the tier 1 guys that we were supporting. And then I'm over in the JOC trying to feed pretty classified information to my squadron, which now has 12 aircraft. We had gone all in with iron we'd call it the Rainbow Coalition. So there's a whole bunch of PAVOCs there from 3 different CONUS units and guard units, and we had 12 aircraft in theater. It was crazy. And we were working take on to JSOC. And so I was the liaison over there to try to interpret all these hits and tier 1 craziness going on every night with the 160th and this and that and everything else, and then boil that down into a format that was below top secret, and then get it over to my bros and my brothers and sisters that are literally on the other side of the T barrier, having to go out and support them. So that was very eye-opening. Is my first exposure to interagency world, where you've got in that particular building, it was an old Iraqi bunker, like a HAZ, basically a hardened aircraft shelter. And you had all of DOD, every 3-letter agency, and everyone was there to kill terrorists and Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And that was our sole mission, being chopped to them, which was interesting. So I got to go to, I went to Fort Bragg, and then war civilian closed the whole time. It was a very interesting deployment, but gave me a lot of context on how command relationships work and who calls the shots and who works for who. And then from there on out, 7, 8, 9, 10 was just flying as a flight lead in Iraq. And then, gosh, like I said, it got real bad. 07, 08. We were responding to a lot of stuff. Just any kind of drama, whether it was a downed helicopter or 2 helicopters roll into each other on a hit, taking assaulters right into the X at a compound or whatever the case may be, to coalition stuff, to I mentioned earlier, a 3-letter agency loses a predator, and there's some certain stuff that they don't want to go in the wrong hands, so we'd get launched on that. We had Iranian drones coming into Iraq, where we got looked at as an option to shoot down an Iranian drone because we could fly at the same altitudes and basically the same flight regime, and let one of our gunners let loose on one of those things. So that we were looked at as a COA for that. So just a real variety of missions and situations on every one of those deployments. And then
any specific missions in Iraq really stand out to you?
Yeah, I would say when that expeditionary squadron that was at Balad, we had forward operating bases where we would send out 2 or 3 helicopters to support different JSOC lines of effort in Western Iraq or Northern Iraq and Mosul. So that was fun from an aircrew standpoint, and also get away from the 05 lieutenant colonel squadron commander as a captain and basically be like a little det commander. Flight lead, kind of, take your crew and go live up in Mosul for a period of time, or go live out in Al-Assad. There was a cross-border op that went on we did mission rehearsals for 2 straight months. JSOC went in to get Abu Ghadia. You can see all this on open source. And so we were out there with Delta and the 160th, and they were just doing mission rehearsals every night for a cross-border op. And we rotated out. I think a couple weeks after I rotated home, they actually launched and did a daytime raid into Syria and rolled that dude up. So it was an intense time in, I'd say, the war on terror, and watching all the money and resources flow to JSOC and the CIA, and to see what the full capabilities of the U.S. government are when they really want to find someone, throw everything we have at it. I wouldn't want to be that person on the top of our list. And that still holds true today. And this was 15, 20 years ago. I mean, the capabilities now with cyber and space and all of these different OSINT and different intelligence capabilities it's just insane. So very educational from an air crew standpoint. I was going through, like you go from what is a wingman to a 2-ship to a 4-ship to the Sandy and Misty and all your different quals, like the ladder, so to speak, within the A-10 community. I was moving my way up the ladder in the Pavehawk community, in the cockpit, and then running different shops around the squadrons, being training or plans and exercises, just kind of becoming a very well-rounded squadron level dude. And that's also the period during those Iraq deployments where I made a choice not to do SOS.
Which is squadron officer school, which is like mid-career progression, right? You need it to be
it was a box to check, and it's like deploy, Korea for a year, deploy. Like, hey, I got to go to SOS, like to get promoted to major. Yeah, we'll get it taken care of. Okay, deploy, and they're like, well, you need to do it in correspondence because you've got to compete to go in residence. I was like, well, if I do in correspondence, can I just check the box and we're good? No, you still need to go in residence. I'm like, well, then just send me in residence. Like, why would I do it twice? So I started this is where I started to run into like not playing the game so much as an officer and like all the box checking and bureaucracy. And I really enjoyed deploying. I was just in that phase of life. It's a roller coaster. And like you're gone for 4 months. You come home, you spin up for 4 to 6 months, and then you're gone for 4 months. And then, you get off that. Eventually you get off that roller coaster. You're like, holy shit, that was not normal. That was a little crazy. But at the time, just in the thick of it, and I was loving it. So I actually didn't do SOS, got passed over intentionally, and I didn't care. I was kind of going to fashion myself into a warrant officer within the Air Force ranks, right? I was just going to take selective continuation and be a career captain and just deploy, because I was in my happy place. Even though it definitely, parts of it sucked and it wasn't normal. When you were home, your life wasn't normal. It became the norm, but then when you stop that someday, I look back now and think, wow, it was a crazy lifestyle, that 10 years of my life that I was sort of totally committed to the GWAT. So I actually got out. I had gotten passed over, and I had an opportunity to get out. It was an accidental situation. I never had the intention to do that, but after you get passed over, you don't have to take selective continuation, which is basically you can stay in and not promote and just be essentially a warrant officer, where your job is to just be a captain and fly in the squadrons. And I was cool with that, but I had a chance to get out. So I went on terminal leave. I started working for a good friend of mine's company as an account manager at basically a software company. And 3 weeks into that, I was like, oh my God, I'm not ready for this at all. At all. Like, it was crazy. So I think I had a week left of terminal leave, and I'd really pissed off some leadership within the CSAR community, and kind of just doing things my own way and screw the system.
Wait, what'd you do to piss them off particularly?
Well, the SOS thing, I think, really became a problem, because it was like, well, now we're not going to send you an instructor upgrade because you don't want to do SOS. I'm like, okay, show me the AFI, the Air Force instruction. Show me in black and white a legal reason I can't be an instructor because I don't do SOS. Like, you want me to go to Maxwell Air Force Base and throw Frisbees and have leadership lessons from a bunch of guys who've never been to war that are just rear echelon, typically non-mission hackers? And no, I'm going to stay in the fight. So why would I do that? And it just didn't go over well with them. And then, so they delayed my iPug for like a couple of years.
So your instructor upgrade.
Yeah, they're like, well, you're just going to be a flight lead. You're not going to be an instructor. And, okay, well, that's fine too. Whatever. Like, if you want to play that game, then I'm happy. I'm getting good money. I took the bonus. And I just pissed off some leaders, and they were cool enough to let me. I had a week of terminal leave left. Well, they had to, by law, they had to let me stay in the Air Force, and I took continuation. And a buddy of mine he was going to Iraq like in 2 or 3 weeks after I decided to come back, and his wife, they just had, I think, their first or second baby. And it was bad. I mean, she didn't almost make it through, and he was like off to Iraq in 2 weeks. And I said, dude, I'll go on that one. You stay here. I wasn't part of the planning within the squadron. Now there's a new player on the chessboard. I'll go take that one, dude. You chill out, stay with your wife. Like, I want to go back and fly around Iraq 50 feet off the ground and do PAVOK stuff, CSAR stuff. And so that worked out for everybody. And I came back in and just kept grinding as a captain and a flight lead and an instructor. They finally, eventually figured we had to make this guy an instructor because he's going to be around for a while. Took the bonus, that kind of thing. So there's a bonus, as for the listeners, the Air Force, when you get to the end of your commitment, to entice you to stay in, they offer some cash bonuses annually because they're competing at that point against the airlines. And that's a whole nother podcast. You can talk about the pilot shortage and the back and forth between the Air Force and the airlines. But yeah, it was a fun ride. So Iraq. Yeah, go ahead.
What was your personal life at this time during that like decade of deployments?
Good question. I was looking back. I was guilty of trying to probably do square peg round hole kind of thing. Like, it's tough on marriages in the SOF and CSAR world. Any community that spends a lot of time downrange, it's just is hard to have to balance out family life. So I decided to try to do that, and I probably forced a relationship with a girlfriend into an engagement, into a marriage that it didn't work out. That ended well for everybody. It was amicable, no lawyers involved. But I was trying to do too much. I think I was trying to live what my normal life would have been had I not been in the military, because I still had a lot of ties to Tucson and my family, and I was still trying to live that life. But then I'm also trying to live this life where I'm off to war half the year, and I'm the other half I'm training. So just too much on my plate. And so that marriage didn't work out. Luckily, to everyone came out of that on
no harm, no foul kind of thing.
Yeah, no harm, no foul. Exactly. And it was tough. It was just a lot of work hard, play hard kind of stuff. A lot of drinking, a lot of alcohol. Got in trouble every now and then. Got in some trouble in Korea, but nothing nothing career ending, but just paperwork, stupid pain in the ass stuff that drunk captains do in Korea, or whatever the case may be. So eventually I started to sort of mature as I got closer to becoming a major and being a field grade officer towards the last 5 years or so of my career. But my personal life, to answer your question, was a little off. Wasn't quite normal. I didn't realize it. I thought that was normal, but it wasn't normal looking back when you're in that kind of a thrash.
So you ready to talk about your Afghanistan deployment, 2014?
2011 was when I went back.
2011.
Yeah,
okay.
I went back. I did Afghanistan first, and then 6 Iraqs, and I went. My last 2 were Afghanistan. So the one in 2011 was short notice. Something came up with the 55th, and they had basically some guy. A dude needed to come home, and they needed a 30-day stopgap. So on a short notice, I jumped on a plane and was like, okay, whatever, I'll go back to Afghanistan and cover. And it was eye-opening to see how far that theater had matured with the U.S. presence and the footprint and the medevac everywhere and colonels and chiefs. And I mean, just Kandahar was a massive city. The base was a city south of actual Kandahar city. It was very established, and it was a learning curve because it wasn't the Afghanistan that I had deployed to 7 years earlier.
You're going into the surge, right? Like the Marja.
Yeah, Marja, it was a little before that out in Bastion. I went to Kandahar. I get there and like literally 4 days later, the Bin Laden hit happens. And some of my friends were trying to connect dots there that didn't need connected. Like, why did you just leave all of a sudden? And then you guys get Bin Laden. Wait, no, I wasn't, dude. I literally got woken up by my gunner the morning of that hit. And like, they got Bin Laden. I'm like, who did? What? We were not read into that at all. That was a tight circle, as we've all learned afterwards. But I was in Afghanistan. I didn't go into Pakistan. I wasn't part of that mission. But that was pretty interesting. And then towards the end of that deployment, May 26th, was when the DFC mission happened. And that kind of changed. At the time, it didn't really change my trajectory. 3 years later, that came to bite me in the ass, which was, I think, a normal mental health sort of coping mechanism, defense mechanism. It was a really hairy mission, and we launched on another one an hour later, and you just put these things into boxes, right? So
let's talk through that. Let's talk through the DFC mission.
Yeah, for sure. And then the mental health piece of it is a big part of that later. But the mission itself, we get launched. I'm kind of at the top of my game, peak of my career, so to speak. If you would equivalent of like looking at a professional athlete, like I'm just, I'm 8th deployment, flight lead, instructor, pretty experienced dude, and with that comes a lot of responsibility because you're trying to train guys and show them the right way to do business and whatever else. So we get launched on an afternoon on the 26th of May. Kind of just another day at the office. We were launching a lot out of Kandahar and Bastion all over Afghanistan at that point in the war. And it was pretty sketchy details. Like, okay, fine. Let's just let's fire up the PAVOX and let's go. Because time is of the essence. And I was never one to wait around for insignificant details before I would make decisions. So we jump in, we start hauling ass to the Pakistani border. The Army is screaming for a hoist cape. They specifically request the Pedros, which is our call sign. We've gone from Jolly to Pedro, which was a nod to some early call signs in Vietnam just early roots, so to speak. So Pedro, that call sign became pretty well known in Afghanistan for Air Force rescue is going to come no matter what. So we get a call, hey, we need the Pedros. We need a hoist. It's 6,000 feet. There's 10 KIA. It's a mess. We got 4 Cat Alphas, meaning there's 4 guys that if they don't get to higher care in an hour, they're going to expire. And it's just a shit show. So, all right, well, let's just head south. And we got 45 minutes en route to work over the horizon communications through SATCOM and get the details we need. But they need us bad, and they need us like 40 minutes ago. So we tear off to the south out of Kandahar and head down to the Pakistani border. It's in a really, really remote, high altitude, no vegetation, just like, when you're flying around there and you look and you're like, it looks like another planet kind of a thing. So that it's right on the Afghan-Pak border. And these guys got, I guess I'll talk later on what I found out after it, but I'll just give it to you blow by blow as we launched. We don't really know what we're getting into. And I'm talking to an Apache that's overhead, an Army Apache gunship helicopter. And he's trying to direct traffic and handle this absolute shit show on the ground. So there had been an initial IED that had left a cloud, according to him, about 1,000 feet high, like a mushroom cloud. And it was a trailer that an Army Pathfinder unit from the 101st, some DIA guys, and some Afghan police had gone to investigate. And it was a trailer full of pressure plates and explosives, and the bad guys clacked it off when they were all standing around. So a lot of guys sort of somewhat vaporized initially, and then the remaining dudes in the squad went to the high ground, and then more IEDs go off on the high ground. So the Apache overhead was adamant that they're on remote control, like there's guys on triggermen on a ridge line nearby watching and just popping these things off when U.S. forces get near them. So there was an Army 60, a slick Army 60 there that had landed in a wadi on like the next valley over, and they're like 200 pounds of fuel. Bingo. I mean, they're way low on fuel. and they don't have a hoist. And we're specifically called in to get, there's 4 soldiers, one of which was a really bad Cat A. And so we get there, and the Apache was adamant about, I need you at a 200-foot hoist. There's IEDs everywhere. They're clacking them off. You're going to get blown up. And all I had, just with physics and aerodynamics and the power margins and the hot, high desert mountains, I could pull off about a 50-foot hover, which is just about ground effect for us. So if ground effect is with fixed wings or rotary wing, it's similar. You just kind of get a little bit of a cushion, so to speak. So I could get about a 50-foot hover, but that's all the higher my engines are going to produce power to allow me to hover above the ground. So ideally 200 feet, I'll run 200 feet of cable down via the FE, and we'll pluck guys out of bad situations. In this one, kind of a semi-active, I guess, minefield, for lack of a better term, or IED field. So we get there. We are the lead helicopter, spins into the zone, comes to this high hover, and the Apache's not happy. You're going to get blown up. Get out of there. It's, IEDs are going to go off. And I'm like, dude, this is all I got. And he gets it. He's a major at the time. I debriefed with him later, but he understood. So this is all I got, dude, and we want to get your boys out of here. Turns out that's the company commander overhead, and these were his guys that he just watched blow up and now blow up again. And he's just up there in an Apache watching. So he's got a Black Hawk over here that's bingo, out of fuel, got to leave. So they take off, and we go into the hover, and we put in a couple PJs. And I remember in the hover looking down and thinking, God damn, what went on here? Because I didn't know the pressure plate trailer. I didn't know the secondaries. I'm just reacting to these guys pop smoke in a valley. There's an Apache that doesn't want me that low to the ground, but sorry, dude, this is what I'm going to do. We're going to get your boys. And the guy that they had in a somewhat of a makeshift litter, and they had his M4. He was naked, clothes completely blown off in the blast, and his eye sockets were his eyes were gone. And I remember looking down, and they had an M4 that they had used to kind of strap as a makeshift, splint, so to speak. And there's a couple soldiers with them there. So we drop in a couple PJs. And as I'm looking, we're in this somewhat high hover, but we're over a valley, and it is descending terrain behind us. And I'm looking for hover references, and I've got a relatively youngish, not terribly young co-pilot, but I'm on the controls at this point. That's pretty normal. When you get in hairy situations, you want the most experienced guy in the controls. So I'm looking, and I look off my probe, which we've got the refueling probe off of the Pave Hawk, and I'm looking to kind of align that with this hilltop, and I'm looking over here, just trying to, a 50-foot hover, combat hover, and we're maybe going to have to go hot. The Apache's looking to find triggermen. Like, my wingman is up there. They're doing altitude deconfliction. And I'm looking for hover references, and I see this about the size of like a hot tub. There's a crater right off my nose, like co-altitude, maybe 40, 50 feet in front of us. And there's body parts, and there's a dude's torso there, who I find out later was one of the lieutenants, I think, that was part of that Army unit. And I don't know. I just remember I'm sitting there thinking, I remember a scene in Black Hawk Down where a guy gets blown in half, one of the operators on the ground, and they know he's dead. And someone leaves a voicemail, and his wife just misses it back in Arizona or whatever it is, like this really poignant, visceral scene. And I'm sitting there thinking, fuck, like, this dude hasn't been dead for an hour, and his family is in wherever, and they don't know shit. And this all just happened. Like, it just, my brain's we're in shock trying to respond to the situation, and I'm just trying to sort out what's what. So the PJs go down. I look over, we're running doors off, so we don't have the front doors on the helicopter, because that really helps us mitigate brownouts and all the no wind and things that make us hard to hover. And I look out, and I see a couple Army guys on the ridge right here next door, and I just kind of give them a head nod, like, hey, I see you there. And I think it's his bros, and they're like in a prone position. And then I give the controls to my co-pilot because I'm like, all right, I don't want to hog the sticks here. He's a capable co-pilot. I'm gonna let him take over this hover and just try to like sort things out and look around, pump the brakes because I'm in it. And he takes the controls and I'm looking around some more and I look back over and the two dudes that I had like nodded my head at are their bodies and there's pools of blood underneath them pouring down. And I'm like, fuck, man, this is fucking bad. And, about that time we're starting to pull up, the PJ was a big boy, like a tight end, NFL tight end size guy. And the guy he's picking up is also like an NFL linebacker type of 240 pound strong prior Marine Force recon guy. We helicopter loses power. I think the winds had shifted and I hadn't burned off enough gas. And we're operating at such a fine margin that now I'm lifting up 500 pounds of two dudes. And the power margin I had at 50 feet was enough, but that equation changed. Maybe my engines weren't exactly to the right engine power that they respect. There's so many variables. Like you're right on the ragged edge of a lot of variables. So the rotor starts drooping, which means the RPM is going down, which means you're coming down. And the rotor starts drooping. I jump on the controls. I say, my controls, I take it because I'm not going to let the co-pilot, I'm like, we're fucking crashing. I'm going to do what I can to mitigate and not crash this fucking thing if I can. So the rotor's coming down to about 90%, which is really bad. Like at 88 to 92%, my main generators flip off and then it opens up all the anti-ice valves and I lose 40% more power like that. And so we're coming down and like we're over a small little valley and we're heading down into the valley. I instinctively, again, like I mentioned earlier, I didn't come out of the womb knowing to kick in right pedal and go backwards downhill flying a helicopter. That comes from screwing around in an LZ at Fort Rutger with another captain that knows how to fly a Huey to just teach you how to get out of bad situations. So we start slide. Did you ever see the Fort Hood crash, the Pavehawk that rolled down Fort Hood? Mm-hmm. Exact same scenario aerodynamically in power. And as you know, in that horrible video, which we watched at Fort Rutger as it happened, the next day in the news cycle, the probe hit the side of the mountain and then caused a rotation. And then that Pavehawk rolled all the way down the mountain. Awful video to watch. And people are flying everywhere. One of the PJs, the helicopter rolled over him with the door and then in the deep snow and kept going. So a 20,000 pound helicopter rolls over top of him and he's standing there like, holy shit. Yeah, that's an amazing story. Coincidentally, that bird was a Portland Guard bird that had come down, was in the Portland Guard at the time because it's a Mount Hood rescue. I'm going down a little rabbit hole here, but that bird got back into service and was flying with the 55th because they moved that iron from Portland down to stand up the 55th back in 2003. So I'm like, well, we're fucking rolling down the hill and I'm fucking mad. I just remember being fucking pissed. Like, oh God, Pedro 6.6 was a pretty well-known shoot down in our community. We were running Pedro 5.5 at the time because we were 55th cruise. And I remember thinking, fuck, this is how it ends, Pedro 5.5. And we just slid backwards. I kicked in right pedal and swung the front around. I called shear, which means I'm telling my flight engineer, cut the fucking hoist, let these guys fall to the ground. I don't know. I lost essay. I didn't know where they are. Like the helicopter's coming down, the hoist is coming up, we're going down, and then backwards, I'm like, fucking shear. Cause I literally went, we're going to roll 3 to 4 times. Like that's how far down this hill. I like all this is going through my head at once. And I remember just shear. Luckily my flight engineer didn't listen to me, made the right decision, which we enable our guys to do with CRM. And he had him right about up at the door as I'm yelling shear. And so he continues the hoist, reaches out and kind of hangs on to the dudes as he's basically looking forward as the helicopter's doing this and going down the hill. And I look, we get pointed downhill. The rotor decay has stopped and it's at about 88. Like we're below 90 on the rotor. So my chiclets, these little green and yellow and red lights, they're in the red, which is not good. And I'm like fuck, here goes the fucking generators. We're fucked. Like I might have fucking saved it, and now the generators are going to go off. And then we start getting some forward speed, airflow over the rotor disc. Luckily, I'm flying down the side of a valley, and the rotor comes back, and we fly out in forward flight and get moving. And what the fuck? Like, it was, we take 30 seconds to make sure we didn't shit our pants, and what the fuck just happened? And did I torch an engine? I don't even, like, I didn't even, like, I shot it, probably should go on a deck lockout, meaning I take one of the throttles to lock out, but we didn't even have, it happened so fast. And we had flipped on, the co-pilot and I both had thought to flip on contingency power, which is the first step in an EP, an emergency procedure, to basically stop the bleeding. And it allows your engines to burn up into a 10-second limit where, yeah, they'll give you power. After about 10 seconds, the engine's going to start to melt. So we flipped on contingency power as this all went down. So we fly out. I'm worried if I've exceeded limits, if my engines are going to still even give me anything, but we get our shit together, get in a sock. My wingman overhead was like, dude, what the fuck? You guys, what happened? You guys okay? I'm like, we're good, dude. We'll debrief it later. Like, there's still 2 guys in the zone. And I can't remember the count. Maybe there was 2 guys on the ground. We put 2 PJs in. So maybe, yeah, it was just the 2 Cat A's, I think, that at that point we were going for. So all I know is that there's still a PJ and still a soldier there as we kind of fucking fly backwards and sideways down the mountain. And then my wingman has to go in and pick them up because I'm not fucking going back in there. I'll crash the helicopter. So Jeff went in and did a great low approach and dropped the PJ. They picked up the other guys and they got out. And he kind of did not an out of control forced thing, but he did a right pedal turn and came down the mountain because aerodynamic geekery with helicopters, right pedal takes power out of the situation. It just makes it easier. It gives you more power because you're not fighting the torque. So he leaves and we kind of get our shit together and we're below bingo, back to Kandahar. And it's like, let's get the fuck out of here. And, I've got it in my mind. This guy he was still alive. He's thrashing back there. And I've got 2 big PJs holding him down. This dude's 240 pound, benches out of 250, big guy. And he's thrashing and trying to get out of the litter, and it's just a mess back there. And so we fly out. The Army had launched a couple 58s out of, I don't even know where they're out of, but it was the 06 Commander, and the weather was sketch the whole way down there. We were having basically a dust storm was blowing in, so we're flying back down through these ridges, coming out of some altitude, and we see them, and we kind of do one of these. With this, we fly right by their formation. I mean, close, and they were right by us. And I'll never forget. There wasn't a single radio call. We had been some deconfliction calls, but then we got visual on each other, and they went by, and I just hear their commander come up with his call sign, and he says, "Thanks, Pedro." And then it's not over yet, so we got to get back to Kandahar. I'm below bingo. My wingman's right at bingo. My Chalk 2, the other helicopter. And winds aloft are, as you know, as any pilot knows, and for civilian audience, the wind blows at different directions at different altitudes, and that changes. And there's surface winds, and then 1,000 feet, 2,000, 3,000 feet up, they might be blowing a totally different direction. So we're down low level, and I'd say, Jeff, dude, go up like 500, 1,000 feet, check winds aloft, and my co-pilot's just running the numbers on our nav system, and like we don't have gas to get to Kandahar. And this dude he's dying, and we got to get him to some kind of care, if not level 1, level 2. And there was a fob called Spin Bulldog that was caddy kind of out of the way but closer. Like I could go straight line to Kandahar, which is about 40-minute flight, or I could go to Spin Bulldog and land with gas but minimal medical capabilities. So I asked the team lead, I say, dude, we're going to run out of gas. I don't know if we're going to make Kandahar. Can I go to Spin Bulldog? And he goes, dude, if we go to Spin Bulldog, he's not going to make it. Okay, decision's made. Worst case, I'll land 2-3 miles short of Kandahar. There's a highway there. There's QRFs. It's a mature area. I'm not worried about bad guys if I have to put this thing down and auto-rotate in or land on fumes just shy of the airfield. Like, I'll accept that. And so we're running the numbers, and Jeff goes up, winds aren't any better. He starts getting on guard and yelling for any area refueling capable of C-130, which would have been our HC-130 out of Bastion, which hadn't launched for us. Because, well, I won't get into that decision-making process, but there were some fucked up decisions made by some colonels why we didn't have a tanker on that mission. Maybe there's a Marine Casey out there. Who the fuck knows? Like, it was a good idea. He was a really good wingman on that day. He was in general. He just made some great decisions. He made the Apache overhead commander. He made his life easier because he was really, we do really well with flying 2 helicopters in proximity with altitude blocks, employing weapons and doing stuff. And this Apache was a little freaked out. And I'm bringing in 2 helicopters. I got to get out of the way. And Jeff just said, look, dude, you just go do you. I'm going to fly behind you in like a loose trail. And don't worry about altitude confliction. And just took his whole thing down. My wingman was awesome. So Jeff is doing what he can because he's got another 100 pounds of fuel, maybe 200. And the numbers, the winds, they always kind of change. Things change. I always running these calculations like every 2 minutes. And it starts looking like I'm going to land with 100 pounds, maybe 200. Sweet. We're back in the game. And I make the mistake of asking how he's doing back there. And he's not doing well. And the PJ says, I don't think he's going to make it. And for reasons I don't, can't understand, I decided to tell that to Chalk 2. Well, somehow one of their Army guys that was also down on the ground, which was this guy's buddy, was up comms, and he heard that call. Just shit happens. So we get to Kandahar. There's a C-17 on final. He gets to go around. We always knew when you work with guys every day downrange. So we know the kids in the tower. And Pedro 5-5, emergency, Cat Alpha, direct roll 3, move all traffic. Like, dude. And so they parted the seas, and the 17 goes around. We're visual with the airfield at this point, and I fly direct to the helipad there at roll 3 and landed. And we were never supposed to land with less than 500 pounds per the regulations. I think we had like 150 pounds of fuel left, to the point where we land, the Jays get out and take the dude into the cache, the surgical facility. And the weight and balance was such where I had never, like the helicopter, I've never been in a helicopter that light. And my asset, like I try to just taxi off the ramp to let the other helicopter in, and my tail wheel was coming off the ground. Like, what in the hell? Like, this is crazy. And so there's a FARP at the other end of the airfield. Well, now I'm declared the emergency word. I'm way under gas. I can't even go pick up and hover a half a mile to the FARP. Like, we're gonna taxi over into this, ramp and shut down and get cold gas. Now we're off alert because we are like, dude, there's calls coming in. Like, it's a busy day in Afghanistan and in the fighting season. So we taxi over, we shut down. Chalk 2 lands, they let their guys out, they shut down. And guys get out, and dudes are smoking cigarettes. And I'm just like, I don't know, still in shock. Like, what the fuck did we just do? And I hope this guy lives. And they came and cold gassed us and, brought in fuel trucks, and we filled up the 60s. And then the PJs came out after about 20 minutes, and he didn't make it, which, at the time is a kick in the teeth. And we tried, and we got gas, get the fuck back in the helicopters. Let's go back over to Mustang ramp. And we're probably going to get launched again very soon. And we did, like within an hour. So I took that whole thing and just fucking put it in a box and was like, next mission, let's go. And never really debriefed it per se, other than just what the fuck kind of conversations around the squadron after we came off shift. Cause I didn't even really know how to debrief it. I actually went into the J John and puked because we didn't even have like actual shitters. We had porta johns. So I like puked just out of like releasing all of the adrenaline and whatever the fuck else had happened to me. And the following days, the chaplain came over. My deployed commander, his buddy of mine, he's a major, did what he could do to kind of have the chaplain talk to everyone, myself included. And then it was up until later that year in August when the extortion 47 got shot down. That was the largest life of Afghanistan in one day in like, I don't know how many years in that theater. And Betrayus came in, they did the whole ceremony, and, you know, it was a big deal. I went over later that night as the shift slowed down and talked to the major that was overhead. And that's where I kind of find out all this stuff. So it turns out that Sergeant Osman, the one that, you know, we really wanted to, that really tried to save, he had, I probably shouldn't even get into it because his family might watch this, but he didn't have a chance medically. He was alive, but no matter, this could have happened in the parking lot of Houston Trauma Center, and he was not going to make it. But we didn't know that. So, you know, we're doing our job that others may live. That's what we do. But he was the senior NCO. I think I had mentioned he had been a force recon Marine guy. And this major, who's a West Point grad, scheduled 1 hour every night in Kandahar when things were slow for him and that Sergeant Osman to have a cigar and have him mentor the major on leadership. And he just watched him almost die and then watched us almost roll a helicopter. He said, dude, I was running the crashed helicopter checklist after you guys started descending down that mountain. He goes, your probe hit the dirt, right? And I said, no, it was probably a foot or two away. My gunner called. As I say, they give us, CRM is really good. Like, hey, mains are at 10, 5, 1. You know, I know how high, I've got a radar altimeter and I've got 2 eyeballs and mouths and ears and, you know, a crew. And the gunner said he had our mains at 1 foot off the ground as we were sliding backwards down the hill, obviously in ground effect. So we got fucking lucky, like really lucky. So whatever. That was May of 2011, and then I didn't really ever think about it or talk to anyone about it until 2012, when I was back in Kandahar as the DO on a deployment as a captain. Major friend of mine is there as the commander. We're good bros, good dude, real good pilot, and I was this DO as a captain, and night shift flight lead, so busy, but. We come across some documents, and I come across a classified Army report. It was an AAR of they sent like EOD guys and a team out there to investigate the whole thing. So I'm sitting there looking at pictures of everything that went down and where we were and the whole debrief, and it was not pretty. Like there was 5 IEDs in that valley on a spider network, on remote control IEDs that were not detonated because the triggerman probably got scared. I don't know. Reasons I'll never know. Those other ones didn't go off. So, you know, I was never one to like put myself in for any medals or anything, but people start saying, dude, you got to put in, you guys got to get a medal. I'm like, well, I don't care. Well, you're air. I said, yeah, the guys do. Like, because the way it works with a V device, with Valor, I don't know if you knew this, but enlisted, when they retire, they get like Valor pay. And officers, it doesn't matter. But I said, okay, that's fine. I'll do DFC paperwork for the whole crew, but I'm not writing up my own. I just on principle. I'm not writing up my own fucking DFC. Like I wrote up and spent a lot of time getting all the data and putting everything together and writing up everyone for DFCs. And then my major friend took my story and wrote up his citation for it. And then that went into the awards board, and then whatever, right? 2014, 3 years later, I'm at Nellis, and the first sergeant comes up and he's like, hey, dude, you got a DFC. I'm like, whoa, okay. I go, let me see it. So he's got, you know, the stack of all those blue things, and he slides it out, and I'm like, fuck, okay. I go, oh, actually, no, I took it. I said, thanks. And I go, this is not going to be a big hangar full of people and a 2-star handing out a DFC. I don't even want to fucking, like, thanks. Cool. I'm just glad the guys are going to get Valor pay and get a DFC with V, hopefully. You know, that was the whole intent. And then it gets back to the commander that I had pulled that out and made my decision that I'm not going to stand up in a fucking hangar full of people. And, you know, I just didn't want to talk about it. I'm like, it was a shitty day. My commander calls me in his office. Why don't we talk about it? Well, it's a fucking shitty day, dude. Like it was a fucked up day. I fucked things up. Like, we're lucky to be alive. I don't want to fucking talk about it. Well, what happened? And I'm fucking 39 years old, bawling like a little fucking kid in front of my 05 commander, who's coincidentally my same age, because at that point he was 2 below and I'm 5 above, or whatever the fuck I was. So good dude. I mean, but he was like, okay, like, holy shit. So had a good relationship with the flight surgeon. We had assigned flight surgeons to every squadron, and we talked to the flight surgeon and then quickly moved that under the mental health clinic, to which I did not push back. Because I'm like, I didn't even want to fly anymore. I was done. My last Finney flight, I didn't even know it was my last Finney flight, because I never flew after that conversation. And it was like, I just had a lot to unpack, and we can get into the mental health stuff and the, moving forward, and how lucky I was to have the resources there and the leadership chain that within my squadron and the group and wing that took care of me and then put me into a staff job and let me stay in the Air Force, even though I was on meds for a long time afterwards, and I did the work with mental health and the psychologist. But you know, that's kind of how I got presented my DFC. I tried to slide it under the radar, and it came to bite me. And I had a lot of shit to unpack of 9 years of deployments and then that specific trauma. But I can tell you 10 more stories that are about as harrowing, that were just another fucking day at the job. That one just really kind of stood out because it had a lot of visibility. But there's a lot of times, and any 60 driver or any air crew member in Payhawks will tell you that they've cheated death multiple times, either in training, stateside, or on deployments. It's fucking dangerous business. So, you know, we train and mitigate that really, really well. But sometimes, you know, cost of doing business is the cost of doing business.
Man, that's a heavy story.
Yeah, dude, I haven't told that one publicly really ever. So took me a long time to tell my psychologist through cognitive behavioral therapy, which is writing it down on a legal pad with a pen and paper. And I pushed back on that. I'm like, I don't need to do that shit. You want a Word doc? She's like, no, that doesn't work. This is the gold standard to heal PTSD and trauma, is to do cognitive behavioral therapy, which is you and I talking every week and you bringing me a legal pad and your version of the story every week for months. And it took me a while dude, the first time I wrote that down, it was not pretty. I was a fucking angry dude. And I really blamed myself and other people, and the whole situation just could have been, you know, a lot of guilt and a lot of blame. And then over the process of writing it out and putting in the work, and shit gets worse before it gets better. When you go down this mental health road and you raise your hand, it's going to get worse before it gets better if you put in the work, and that's the way it's supposed to work. But as I got through that and iterated over that story, I got to where I could tell it to her. Eventually I told my dad. That was probably the first time Kate's ever heard it in any detail. And yeah, I didn't know how that was going to come out, but yeah, it was an index trauma, as they say. So, I mean, I did a whole nother deployment after that. 4 months is, you know, I just put that in a box, because when you're in that position, you're like, dude, I'm one of the elders of the tribe. Dudes are looking up to me. I'm making decisions that affect everybody. I'm the night shift flight lead. I'm the go-to guy on the hairy missions. Like, I can't fucking show weakness. So I didn't until I had to. And then it was fucking floodgates opened up, and the Air Force caught me and took care of me from between mental health clinic, my command leadership, and a PCA over to Red Flag. And okay, well, this dude isn't going to be a flight lead instructor anymore. And he's ridden himself hard, and we've ridden him hard, and that's okay. Let's take him over to Red Flag and let him teach the CAF about PR, which Bart Weed, the commander at Red Flag at the time, saved my life and brought me over there and let me do that and let me thrive, and then sent me down to Tucson to help stand up Angel Thunder. And then I basically wrapped up with some pretty cool staff jobs. And I can talk more about that later with the counter narcotics stuff. But that was a pivotal point, man. I could have been a statistic in a lot of ways, and I'm fucking glad I didn't hurt anyone else. That's really my saving grace with this whole thing, is that these guys, to watch what those guys and a lot of these, my former colleagues and peers go on to do amazing things, enlisted officer all across the board. rescue is a good bunch of people, and they're doing great things still in their professional and personal lives. So I'm just, glad brought my crew back safe,
What advice do you have for like anyone that's in the thick of it with the mental stuff, and they're just like starting to feel those symptoms of the anxiety, the depression, the paranoia? Like how would you advise to dig out of there?
I've thought about that a lot. It's a great question. It's a reason I wanted to tell the story publicly, and I hope there's some people that can learn from this. So I'll tell you what my answer would have been, 6 years ago versus what it is now. 6 years ago, I might have said, keep being strong. Once you go to mental health, what happens, right? Like you're going to lose your rating and all this, and you may not go back in the game. So think long and hard before you want to raise your hand. Now, is that the right answer? Probably not, but that's the way the system worked at the time. Only credit I'll take is like I said, fuck it. I don't care about the stigma, dude. Like I think I've done enough. Let's figure this shit out. If guys or girls are getting to that point, I would hope the answer now that the DOD figures this out is, okay, let's get you a breather. Let's have some sabbatical, if you will. Let's get you away from this fucking unnormal GWAT thrash that our generation has gone through for 20 years. And let's get you in a staff job, or let's send you to a school or do something else. And then when you're ready, if you want to get back in the saddle, cool. It's like riding. I mean, dude, flying's flying, right? That part of it, the hands, the talk, all that, the air sense comes back after a few sorties. And you're going to be a better leader, and you're going to have learned outside of your tribe in the thrash of the roller coaster of the GWAT. But I don't know. I don't know if they're at that now. I tend to try to help peel that back and push that through the VA and advocate for that there needs to be a mechanism for people to take a knee and then get back on the field if they want to. If anyone, to your question specifically, if you feel like you're getting to that point, raise your fucking hand. The Air Force is going to go on without you. I was guilty of that. Everyone gets to that point where like you have an organization leaning on you as a key leader, whether you're a good officer and a company man or not, or just a tactician and you're a guy that they want to fly with. That comes with a lot of weight, and you don't want to show weakness. If I leave, then, fuck it, leave. Get the fuck out of the cockpit or get off the fucking team or whatever it is that you have hit your breaking point. For me, I was 39 years old. For some people, that could be after one deployment. For some people, that could be 47 years old. Some guys never hit it. Some guys are still flying contract CSAR stuff in Africa because that's just what they do, and they love it, and they're fine. Great. Me, 9 deployments, 39 years old, a lot of near-death experiences, and that's when I hit my limit. So you'll know when you're at your limit. You'll know when you're willing to put your hand up and not give a shit about ever flying again, then put it up and put it up high and keep it up. And you're going to be okay. If you don't put it up, then it's on you. Your ego's getting in the fucking way.
Right. Well, I'm glad the Air Force promoted you to 04 and you never did SOS, right?
Never did SOS. I did. I caved. I was waterboarded with Kool-Aid until I did. They like rammed it down I did, what do you call it? In correspondence downrange at Balad, I did all 3 tests in 3 days.
Okay.
And I was like, here's your fucking SOS box. Check. Am I a better leader now? Yeah. Or do I need to go to Alabama and play fucking Frisbee and flicker ball? What the fuck they do at SOS? Is that going to make me a better leader, Air Force? Because I'll go do that, but can I just knock out this stupid test that I already have the answers for? So yeah, I played the game just to show them, prove the point. This is fucking insane.
That's awesome.
It's asinine. Like the game that was played at that time to rack and stack and promote and select people for command and all the bullshit that you and I and everyone sees. It's insane how much extra bandwidth.
Oh, all the ticket punching.
All the ticket punching, all the racking and stacking. And it's like, just fucking worry about the mission, and the cream will rise to the top over time. And whatever, like you don't need to put everyone on this conveyor belt of box checking, yes man, game playing bullshit. It just, I didn't play the game. And eventually, you know, they're like, fuck it, this guy's not going to go away. Let's give him 04 pay, you know, and it worked out. But
can't get rid of him.
pretty much, yeah. And so I was like, I'm doing my fucking 20. So, you know, the mental health thing, I think we're all learning together, right? Like, we're one country, we're one like we're all like there's no bad actors out there that are trying to force people into these bad situations. It's just a product of fucking 9/11 and the GWAT, and there's a lot of lessons learned. I like to think the DoD's figuring it out. It seems like they are, just from when you invited me on that X space the other night. Listening to all those Green Berets and other guys talk about their experiences really resonated with me, and it was like, oh wow, I need to get on these and talk and tell my story and help people and help push on the VA or whatever mechanisms we need to push on to enable war fighters to be in long protracted wars, because this dude, it's the long war has just started and it's never going to stop. And DOD we'll figure that out. The collective we, the U.S. will figure that out.
When did you meet your current wife?
Great. That's a great story. I met her when I was at Fort Rutger in 2002 in Atlanta. So I mentioned my class was like 7 lieutenants and then Jackie Parker, lieutenant colonel, who, you know, all the 55 to 60-year-old instructors were like, oh, I get to fly with her today. You know, like, here's this cute, blonde, highly intelligent F-16 pilot that is like trying to learn how to fly Payfox because she wants to go back to Moffett, the California Guard unit, and get in the fight, you know? So it's funny. So Jackie was Jackie, and then we were just like your typical Air Force young single dudes. A couple guys were married, but we were off in Atlanta drinking and chasing women on the weekends, and met Kate at an Irish bar, and we had about 2 or 3 month period where we dated, and then I moved on to Albuquerque, she moved on to Florida, and it was just that phase in life in our late 20s that it just didn't, you know, we were focused on our professional careers, and then we linked back up 13 years later. I'm doing math in public here, but like, she had moved from there to California, got married, got divorced. I had gone to Arizona, got married, got divorced, moved to Vegas. She was in LA, I was in Vegas, linked up on Facebook, and then the timing was right.
The rest is history.
Yeah, the rest is history. The second time around, it's all about timing, you know.
How much of a help was she going through this process?
She was a big help. She was not, well, she wasn't really... Again, that's probably the first time she's heard the whole story. She's been very helpful in a general sense of
just
me
with the support
as an Air Force spouse and now a retired Air Force spouse, and giving me the time and space to, you know, and the grace to have my shitty days and go back and forth with meds or not meds and, you know, whatever else. So she has a lot of patience with it. At the time, as I went into mental health and cognitive behavioral therapy, I was also getting divorced. So I was like I was a statistic waiting to happen. Luckily, that was a very amicable divorce. I'm still in touch with her and the 2 sons. There was a couple of stepsons involved who they had a father as well, and they're thriving now. So that was lucky, that, you know, couldn't have been worse. But yeah, Kate has been great. And at the time, my ex-wife at the time, Laura, was good too. Her dad was a psychology professor, so she was doing what she could to help. But there's only so much help you're going to take until you put your ego aside and let a professional do it. Because honestly, it's not your spouse's job to be your shrink. Mm-hmm. They can be your best friend, but when in any situation, when a spouse or a friend tries to wear a professional hat like that, it's not going to end well. I think you need to separate, you know, friends and professional relationships, and
can't just dump all that on her.
No, you could, and I would never want to, and nor would they want to hear it or have the tools to you know, deal with that. So, yeah, my psychologist, she was a captain, and she was great. I mean, and it's like on that X space that we were on the other night, I heard a couple guys talk about how you need to really build a relationship with your psychologist and your psychiatrist and whoever else is involved in this team, your spouse, your family. Once you put your hand up, dude, and it doesn't need to stay private. Like it doesn't need to be just, if you want it to be, that's fine. It can be between you and your medical professionals. I would recommend looping in your family and friends and your church if that's what you do, or your drinking buddies, or your band, or whoever your tight circle is. Should probably all know you're working through something, and give you that grace and support. And this isn't just for military veterans; it's for anyone that's going through any kind of processing, any kind of trauma. Like it takes a village, right? To raise a child, it takes a village to heal someone from trauma as well.
Have you heard of the book "The Body Keeps the Score"?
I've not. No.
It's pretty popular, and it's about a lot of these topics. But the gist of it is like if you experience all these traumatic experiences throughout your life, and you just try to bury it, well, it's still there, and it's going to come out in other ways. And it can be either, like you said, through with your therapist, with your pastor, or whatever it may be. And you got to get this stuff out. If you try to contain it, it's gonna be like a demon within you.
Yeah, I've not heard of that book, but I've heard of that concept. Like you're gonna pay the bill. Like you put these things in a box, you got to unpack this messy ass box, right? Like you're not gonna carry this big baggage, right? You're not gonna carry your big messy baggage with you everywhere until you unpack it, and you're gonna need help. And if that's just you and a doctor or a pastor or whatever, cool. If you need professional help, that's cool too. There are resources out there. So the VA gets a big black eye with this stuff. I don't know what to believe. I was lucky, my particular individual case, in my opinion, I was lucky that I had an active duty major Air Force base with the infrastructure there to take on my case and have a team to look over me and then keep me on the team, but change my role. Once you get out, it's probably going to be a lot harder. Let's just be honest. I mean, the VA is a lot of well-intentioned people, but they're going through some bureaucratic, growing pains, and they're trying. It's a well-intentioned organization. I don't know whether, I have not leaned on the VA post-retirement as my primary mental health. Really, I've not done any. I need to probably do more of this because, this and the space and talking to guys in via social media or whatever the case may be, I think is as valuable to kind of do a tune-up, so to speak, with your mental health, and then also share it and help others, because now I can talk to it and talk myself through it and talk other people through the process with a little more experience, certainty behind it. But yeah, there's always going to be a bill to pay. Sooner or later, and if you don't unpack that box, you're gonna end up a statistic, and you're gonna fucking alienate and hurt a lot of family and friends along the way. So throw your fucking hand up.
That's good advice, man. So you had this amazing flying career, happily married now, retired.
Yeah.
What's the next phase look like for Jay Humphrey?
Yeah, I've decided, so I've done private sector stuff for 4 years since I retired in 2020. And I found that very not fulfilling, not because there's anything wrong with it. It just didn't do it for me after what, people like us did for 20 years. So I've decided to get away from that and not worry about making money. I've got enough money, and all I have left is time. I've gotten to I think everyone gets to that point that you realize that money's money. You can always make more. You can focus on that, but time is a depreciating asset for everybody. So I looked at it like I'm hitting 50. I just stepped down from my corporate high-paying sales job with a great company and great people. It just wasn't fulfilling. Nothing against them or anyone that works in that sector. I just kind of decided I want to get out and do creative things. My wife's an artist. I want to maybe get into podcasting or blogging or something like that and tell my story and let other people tell their stories. I'm assuming why part of the reason you're in this is to just sit and listen to people's stories and let them tell it and document history in a long form interview. And I got some photography stuff I want to do. So I'm going to kind of be my own boss and start a company and sell photos and try to give back and do a lot of 501c donations. Because money is money. I mean, time is all that's left. And that all kind of hit me in the last couple months. And then I almost lost my mom in a really bad car accident too. So that was another like wake up call. Like she was inches away from potentially not making it, and she's perfectly fine. It was an act of God, and very early Christmas present in early December, and just a lot of perspective when you step away, I think. So for me, moving forward, that's my plan. We'll see where it goes. I'm scared. I have no idea what's going to happen, but that's part of the fun, right?
Yeah, man. Well, you certainly have, so many stories to tell. There's so much more we could talk about, so maybe I'll have to come back.
Yeah. The counter narcotic stuff was interesting. The staff work, and then the interagency stuff was also very interesting stuff to talk about. But save that for another podcast.
Yeah, you've got a lot to offer, and I think you're going to be really successful, like whatever you do. And however I can help you, I don't have like the largest audience in the world, but I'm introducing them to Jay. Follow Jay, and
it's an audience, and that's important. And I think it's going to grow. And I think it's cool to watch your very young trajectory with podcasting and where you're taking this and what you've done with your retirement, and you've figured out the time and money equation and what you want to do and being your own boss. So I hope everyone gets to that point in their life at some point sooner or later.
Yeah. And these stories are cool. And, it's important. We lived through it. And if we can contribute to the history of our generation of warfighters, then I think it's a valid, it's a good pursuit, because I was thinking like, we had documentaries from the Vietnam guys. We had interviews here and there. We had the little books that I loved from the Vietnam guys.
Books. I read Chicken Hawk, which is a book about a Huey driver in Vietnam when I was in like 6th grade. Yeah, like that's what we had. We had books and like maybe a History Channel thing or something. Like there was nowhere near the amount of good quality.
What if you could just listen to those guys? Like, what if you had 100 interviews of them telling their war stories for 3 hours each?
Yeah,
like that's so valuable.
Totally valuable. And anyone, young folks that are heading into a life of service, whether it's military or whatever, teaching, first responders, on and on and on, any kind of public servant, right? Or businessman, for anything out there, right? There's a mountain of information experience being passed on via this format. And yeah, it's great. It's going to make them better and safer and more effective and more mentally resilient as they move forward. So happy to help be a part of that solution and share my story. There's a whole lot more like it. I'm just one story, dude. There's, I'll focus. I think if I do this podcast thing, I'll really try to bring a lot of the CSAR rescue folks in, because there's just so many stories right there that I know of people that have done similar and crazier things. So, yeah.
Absolutely, man. I look forward to it. And again, so many stories to tell, which means you just have to come back sometime.
Well, I'm definitely loving Oregon, dude. This place is pretty righteous. I've never been here, so I'm loving it so far. So yeah, don't threaten me with a good time, dude. I'll be back.
Absolutely. Oh, well, dude, thanks for coming, and we'll do it again soon.
Okay, thanks, Pork Chop.
All right,
appreciate it.
Late.